Chapter 97. Mo Jingshan's expression was indifferent. It was impossible to discern his emotions, and he did not respond. However, and Shuyan still stood very close to him, tightly pressed against him. She was originally wearing a low-cut gown, elegant and sexy. She pressed against his arm as they walked into the crowd. And Shuyan was clearly familiar with many of the people present. She greeted them with a smile and occasionally glanced gently at Mo Jingshan, causing everyone who saw this scene to unavoidably overthink things. Mo Jingshan's eyes were wide open. Jin Wan stared in that direction. All of a sudden, Xing Yihan stood by her side and handed her a glass of champagne. At the same time, he said in a voice only she could hear, "Tonight's theme has nothing to do with the Xing family. However, my father has always been very interested in America's Shine Group's recent projects and asked me to investigate." Xing Yihan's voice was indifferent, making it difficult to detect his emotions. Shine's foundation is in the Mo family, and it has been developing in America for many years. Its power and wealth cannot be underestimated. Especially Shine's current chairman, Mo Xiaoze. It is said that he is an extremely stubborn person. The daughter-in-law he has taken a liking to is clearly the one by Mo Jingshan's side. Jin Wan forced herself to retract her gaze. She said unconcernedly, "This is a gathering place for the upper class, and it's a dinner with Shine as its theme. There's nothing wrong with him bringing Secretary In along. After all, this Secretary In came from Shine." "Is that so?" Xing Yihan took a sip of champagne, chuckling meaningfully by her ear. Mo Xiaoze hasn't returned to the country for many years. It's rare for him to come back. Tonight, many of the Mo family's people will be gathered here. As the rightful granddaughter-in-law of the Mo family, you were not invited. Even Mo Jingshan himself did not plan on bringing you along. Regardless of whether it's because of Shine's cooperation project or some other reason, in an occasion like tonight, his choice is definitely not you. Jin Wan's grip on the glass tightened. She then coldly glanced at Xing Yihan. Jin Wan turned back and looked in that direction. However, she did not make a sound. Even as the crowd walked over, she remained where she was and did not approach. "You're not going?" Xing Yihan coldly reminded. Jin Wan's expression was not very good. Hearing the voice by her side, she smiled indifferently and pretended to be relaxed. "What for?" "There are too many people and I can't breathe. This place is pretty good." As she spoke, she finished the wine in the glass in one gulp and threw the glass into Xing Yihan's arms. Without even looking at his expression, she casually picked up another glass of wine from the long table in the corner. She could feel that although Xing Yihan's tone was mocking her, as if the more unhappy she was in this marriage, the happier he would be. But in fact, most of his attention was on everyone present. She knew very well how good Xing Yihan was at hiding and how meticulous his thoughts were. Many years ago, it was clear what kind of dangerous person he was. He was deeply hidden, had astonishing patience, and was also a strategist. But right now, she was really not in the mood to care about him. She had not planned to attend this banquet. If she had not seen Mo Jingshan, she would never have come in. But now, she suspected that she was wrong to come here. She really shouldn't have come. The cocktail in her mouth was a little sweet, but the alcohol content was obviously a little higher than the glass of champagne just now. She only took a sip and frowned. She looked down at the colorful liquid in the cup. There were some ice cubes that had not melted yet in the cup, so it was very cold. It was good for calming her burning heart. After drinking 3 or 4 glasses in a row, she saw many people of the Mo family were also present. She was not familiar with the people of Shine Group, but the Mo family was very familiar with her. Jin Wan tried to keep herself in the dark in the corner so as not to be discovered. And from this distance, because the crowd was in front of her, she could no longer see what was going on with Mo Jingshan. She looked back at the front door of the hotel, where several relatives and friends of the Mo family were talking and there were security guards at the door. If she left now, she would only attract attention. Xingyihan. Because Jean Wan had drunk some wine and was not good at drinking, her eyes were a little red. Although it was not obvious, the people around her could still see it. Xingyihan lowered his eyes to look at her, staring into her eyes. Jean Wan looked at him and said with a cold and mocking smile, "Although you haven't been in the Xing family for so many years, you have long been preparing to return, haven't you? Enduring humiliation to bear the burden, enduring hardships to gain courage. You're really something, aw." The man did not speak, but his lips curved imperceptibly and coldly, looking into her slightly red eyes. "Your appetite is not small. You even have ideas about Shine and the Mo Corporation. Aren't you afraid of eating too much and being swallowed back?" Jean Wan coldly glanced at him, the mockery in her eyes deepening. Xingyihan's eyes gradually revealed an obvious sneer. "What can be more terrible than being swallowed back by love? I can even endure this kind of pain. What is there to be afraid of?" Jean Wan's expression did not change, but the coldness in her eyes deepened. It was as if she could see the scene of that young man being rejected by the Xing family many years ago. After his mother married into the Ji family, he was expelled from the Ji family because of her, the eldest daughter of the Ji family. That young man's eyes were deep and profound when he finally looked at her. She coldly curved her lips and picked up another glass of wine, casually leaning against the table behind her, saying coldly, "That's your self-righteous love. It has nothing to do with me." Xingyihan only mildly curved his lips. Looking at her, he reached out and gently brushed past her cheeks that were slightly warm from the alcohol. Jean Wan instantly turned her face away in disgust and then coldly looked at him. "What are you doing? The first time I saw you, you were still the high and mighty young lady of the Ji family. Like a princess who despised everyone, you walked through the dazzling banquet hall. Then, behind your father's back, you hid in a corner and secretly tasted the wine. In the end, you got drunk and slept in a corner, your face as red as an apple. I went to carry you out, but you bit me." Jean Wan unconcernedly moved the glass away from her lips, coldly saying, "If it were now, I definitely wouldn't have bitten you. After all, you're too dirty." Her gaze was cold and sharp, and her words did not leave him any face. Jean Wan did not wish to continue this topic. Although the alcohol content of the wine at the banquet was not particularly high, she really could not hold her liquor. Furthermore, her mood was slightly affected, and she drank several types of wine mixed together. The headache she had during the day came again. Chapter 98. She turned around and quickly walked to another corner of the corridor that led to the washroom. A few people were discussing nearby. As expected, and Xu Yan really returned to the country for President Mo. Only President Mo could make this precious daughter of the Yin family fly over from so far away. This and Xu Yan is the best candidate for a daughter-in-law on Director Mo's side. They're a perfect match. I really don't know what Grandfather Mo was thinking. He actually let a woman whose name I've never even heard of enter the Mo family. No. That Jean Wan is quite famous in Hai Cheng's upper-class society. Her family background isn't bad, and it's said that she's very beautiful. I thought that I would be able to clearly see what kind of foxy beauty that Jean Wan actually has the ability to push aside so many young ladies from all over the country to marry into the Mo family. In the end, who would have thought that she didn't come? She's smart not to be here today. In today's situation, Director Mo definitely won't give her any face. Who knows, he might even find a way to teach her a lesson in front of everyone. As the CEO of Shine Group, he's basically the true ruler of the Mo family. If he wants to keep in Xu Yan in the Mo family, Today is the best time to make sure that Jean Wan doesn't get away scot-free. She definitely won't get any good results by coming here. That's true. Although a lot of people from the Mo family are here today, Grandfather Mo is not here. If Chairman Mo really wants to kick Jean Wan away, he has thousands of reasons to make her come in smiling and go out crying. Even if CEO Mo can protect her, he still has to consider the family's face. This dilemma is really difficult for CEO Mo. What's there to be troubled about? According to President Mo's usual style of doing things, if he really wanted to protect his current wife, even if the heavens were present today, he wouldn't care. Did you really think that Director Mo could suppress him? This is the true strength of this father and son, it's just that they haven't had a direct confrontation yet. So what if that Jean Wan is beautiful? Although beauty is alluring, you'll still get tired of it after a while. I think he most likely has some interest in Shuyen. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given Shuyen so much face and chosen her to be his female companion. Yes, President Mo has given the family a lot of face today, haha. Could it be that the Mo and families would really come to an end? Then I'll be waiting to see what happens. Do you want to make a bet? I bet that Jean Wan will definitely be kicked out of the Mo family soon, and Shuyen will naturally become Mrs. Mo. A rational person like President Mo would definitely make the wisest choice. After all, the family is supporting him in the US. As long as he marries Shuyen, it is equivalent to controlling half of the Chinese economy in the US. This will be more beneficial for President Mo when he takes over Shine Group in the future. With this kind of gambling method, why don't you just rob me? Do you think Jean Wan will be able to sit firmly in Mrs. Mo's position? Isn't he just waiting to lose? Jean Wan's headache worsened. She raised her hand to support herself against the wall. She really could not listen to him anymore. She expressionlessly turned and walked into the corridor. There was no one in the bathroom. She turned on the water and washed her face to wake herself up. Inside the banquet hall, Mo Xiaozi was chatting with people because he had just returned. Suddenly, a figure approached and whispered a few words in his ear. Director Mo, earlier on, we saw that person from the Ji family. The expression on Mo Xiaozi's face changed slightly, but it was fleeting. He looked at the people beside him without batting an eyelid and said coldly in a voice that only they could hear, "She sure has the guts to come. Lock her inside and don't let her out until the banquet is over." After finishing his words, Mo Xiaozi turned his eyes, looking thoughtfully at Mo Jingshan, who was currently surrounded by several Shine Group executives on the red carpet with Shuyen. CEO Mo, Uncle Mo, and my father seem to have finished chatting with the other elders. They're already walking toward us, and Shuyen softly said by Mo Jingshan's side. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He received a glass of wine from a waiter by the side, smiling mildly as he conversed with others. His true emotions could not be seen from his brows, but it caused Shuyen to feel as though he was completely ignoring her. It was a taboo that she could not fathom his thoughts. Shuyen's father and Mo Xiaozi had already approached. Shuyen gently tugged on Mo Jingshan's arm, but in reality, she could only tug on his sleeve. From the beginning to the end, although the two of them entered the banquet together, she was the one who took the initiative to hold on to him and stick to him. Not only did he not give her any response, but whenever there was any physical contact, even if it was just a touch of his hand, he did not give her the chance. Imperceptibly, he maintained an appropriate distance. In the eyes of others, this scene appeared very harmonious. Only Shuyen knew the distance between her and Mo Jingshan. Jingshan, after Shuyen arrived in Haiqing, it's all thanks to your care. If it weren't for her following you, as her father, I would have long flown over to check on her condition because she's been away for too long. Father chuckled. With Shuyen by your side, I can still rest assured. Mo Jingshan appeared to have only just noticed the person approaching. He held a glass of wine in his hand, clinking it with father hands. He smiled elegantly and mildly. "Uncle N, you're too polite. Shu Yan has been spoiled rotten by us in America. She should still have a stubborn temper. It's rare for you to give me this face." Father N was in high spirits. From what I can see, although Hai Cheng's MO Corporation has only been developing for a few years, it is truly a dark horse in the financial and technology industry. If it continues to develop like this, I estimate that in less than 10 years, it will be able to surpass Shine Group, which has a foundation of nearly 100 years. Father N smiled as he spoke to Mo Shaoza by his side. Youngsters these days are all extraordinary, especially Jingshin. He hasn't even reached 30 years of age, but his achievements are already extraordinary. To have such a son, it really makes one extremely envious. You're too kind. Mo Jingshin's true emotions were hard to discern. His face was calm and light with a smile. Even if I cultivate for another few decades, I'm afraid I won't be able to compare to even a 10,000th of Uncle An's. Father N laughed, clinking his glass with him again. He then watched as his daughter continued to stand by Mo Jingshin's side, her smile dignified and magnanimous. They were truly a perfect match. Earlier, Jean Wan had drunk some wine. After standing in the bathroom for a long time, she chose to open a door and enter. She sat on the toilet for a while and took out her phone to look at the time. She then discovered that there was no signal in the bathroom. After a while, he suddenly heard some movement coming from outside. It was a rustling sound. Chapter 99. Jean Wan's entire body trembled. In the darkness and slightly damp bathroom, the surroundings were quiet and empty. She could vaguely hear the sound of water dripping. In the darkness, drop by drop, it caused one's heart to tremble. Also, what was that sound outside? It seemed to be very close. There was a sneaky movement. Jean Wan reached out to push the door open but was surprised to find that the door could not be opened. Every single door in the bathroom could only be locked from the inside. The lock had already been opened by her. How could it be that the door could not be opened? A sense of unease suddenly rose in her heart. She raised her hand and knocked hard on the door, yelling, "Is anyone there?" It was impossible for the lights to break so coincidentally. The King's Court Hotel was a top-notch, high-class place, and it was hosting VIPs from America tonight. The staff here would definitely check every corner properly. There could not be a single mistake. Furthermore, the door was obviously locked from the outside. This could only mean that it was done by someone. Who exactly was it? Xing Yihan definitely could not have done this. Bringing her here and then locking her up was contradictory. There was no motive, so it could not be him. Earlier, she had been hiding in the shadows in the banquet hall and did not meet anyone from the Mo family. No one should have noticed her, nor did she meet anyone who had a grudge with her. To be able to do such a thing in the heavily guarded King's Court Hotel, it was definitely not simple. There were no windows in the bathroom, and the surroundings were well sealed. As the lights went out, the air conditioner also stopped working. The power should have been cut off. Jean Wan's body had not been feeling well today. She did not know how long she would be locked up here. Earlier, she had shouted so loudly, but no one had approached. It was likely that no one had heard her. She gradually took a step back, closing the toilet lid and sitting on it to conserve her energy. She picked up her phone. The light on the screen gave her some sense of security. She was brought here too suddenly by Xing Yihan. She did not have time to charge her phone. Right now, it only had 4% battery. There was no signal, and the battery was almost out. She repeatedly turned on her phone, watching the time pass. Until the phone screen automatically darkened. At the banquet, Mo Jingshan and Mo Shaozi chatted for a while. At this moment, An Shuyan had already been called to the side by Father An. The father and daughter conversed softly. Not long after, Father An and An Shuyan came back. Mo Jingshan turned around, his voice heavy as he spoke to Father An. I remember that when Shu Yan was young, she was engaged to the eldest son of the Wilson family. Later on, because their family moved to England, they never mentioned this matter again. The smiles on Father An and in Shu Yan's faces instantly froze. Mo Jingshan smiled mildly. Now that the Weizhen family has returned to America and has an inseparable relationship with the An family's company, Shu Yan and Mr. Weizhen's eldest son has yet to marry, and there aren't any suitable candidates by his side. In my opinion, why don't our Mo family act as the matchmaker and facilitate the marriage between the two families? And Shu Yan's complexion was slightly pale. She stared in disbelief at the composed Mo Jingshan. As Mo Jingshan spoke, Mr. Weizhen, who was also present today, stood by the side. Hearing his words, he turned around and laughed in not very fluent Chinese. Haha, that engagement was set on Miss An's 5th birthday. After so many years, Mr. An must be forgetful and unwilling to let his daughter marry too early, so I didn't bring it up again. And Shu Yan was silent for less than a second before speaking up. Uncle Weizhen, I read that Shu Yan is currently at a suitable age for marriage. Mr. Weizhen's family also lives with the An family in New York. Even if she marries over, she won't be too far from home. Mo Jingshan's gaze was deep, and his face held a perfect smile that no one could find fault with. He interrupted her words. I heard that when the engagement was first set, New York's mayor was also present. Right now, the other party is already a high-ranking official in New York. If he were to personally host Shu Yan's wedding, it would really be the best. Father An furrowed his brows, concealing the flash of displeasure in his eyes. This matter has already been going on for 20 years, the Weizhen family and the An family have been friends for 20 years. Not only are we business partners, but the elders are also close friends. Isn't it appropriate to arrange the marriage as soon as possible? Mo Jingshan smiled, turning to look at Mr. Weizhen who had already entered the conversation. Mr. Weizhen clinked his glass with Mo Jingshan's, speaking politely in not very fluent Chinese. Miss An is really too outstanding. If she can really marry over, of course we'll be honored. But we're afraid that it will be hard on Miss An. After all, our family has been through a lot in England a few years ago, and it's not as good as before. And Shu Yan bit her lip hard. Her gaze moved from the smiling Mr. Weizhen's face to Mo Jingshan's. Mo Jingshan's every word rendered her speechless. Furthermore, Mr. Weizhen's emotions had already been stirred up by him. Right now, if she were to say a single word of rejection, she would offend the Weizhen family. Right now, Mr. Weizhen's hesitant attitude showed that he clearly wanted her to marry over, yet he was purposely lowering his stance. Mr. Weizhen, you're really being too humble. Your word's not as good as before. How many financial tycoons will be unable to raise their heads? Mo Jingshan appeared to be unintentionally leading the conversation. He smiled lightly. When Shu Yan was young, she came to Haiqing and temporarily stayed with the Mo family. However, because she was not acclimatized, she was brought back to America for treatment. I noticed that she seemed to have lost a lot of weight recently. I'm guessing that she's still unable to adapt to life in the country. CEO Mo. And Shu Yan opened her mouth. Mo Jingshan smiled mildly at her. I know that your thoughts are all on your career, but you've indeed reached the age where you should get married. After the contract is signed, the two of you can head back to America together. Once the wedding is confirmed, remember to inform me. And Shu Yan's expression turned paler and paler. She stared at him, her slender fingers tightly gripping her skirt. Under this man's calm and smiling gaze, there was too much shrewdness hidden, causing one to be caught unprepared. Right now, and Shuyan's father's expression was extremely ugly. However, due to the fact that Imo Jingshan had given An Shuyan and the In family enough face today, his words were also impeccable. It really left one with nowhere to vent their anger, much less any reason to vent it. Imo Shaosa furrowed his brows, coldly watching everything. In his heart, he knew that his own son had turned the tables on him. He was already extremely unhappy. No wonder Imo Jingshan was so cooperative. He only had one goal tonight, and that was to send An Shuyan back to America. He also wanted to pair An Shuyan up with the others. Chapter 100. Imo Jingshan's actions seemed to have sealed off An Shuyan's path of retreat without batting an eyelid. Such a reversal happened in the blink of an eye. No one had expected it, nor were they prepared for it. Just like that, she was pushed away by Imo Jingshan. Following that, Imo Jingshan casually chatted with Mr. Wazin for a while, recommending a friend he had in America who specialized in wedding ideas. It was clear that this matter had already been decided. Father An wanted to say something, but Imo Jingshan had already softly chatted with a local Hai-Ching company manager behind him, ending the previous topic. And Shuyan secretly pinched her skirt. Because Mr. Wazin was by her side, she could not display too much negative emotions. She forced herself to say calmly, "I'm not feeling too well. I'm going to the restroom." As she spoke, she turned and quickly walked toward the restroom. In the end, when she approached the corridor leading to the restroom, she saw that it was dark inside. She then saw the bodyguard who often followed by Uncle Mo's side standing nearby. The bodyguard turned back to look at her and signaled for her to leave with his eyes. And Shuyan stared at the darkness inside, then looked in the direction of the female restroom. Strangely, she seemed to have guessed something. Her footsteps paused for a moment before she slowly retreated and turned to walk away. It was only when An Shuyan's footsteps staggered in another direction from the back of the crowd that Imo Jingshan raised his eyes and noticed a flash of nervousness on her face. Although she hid it well, he could still sense that something was amiss. Right now, An Shuyan's hands and feet were cold. Her eyes were dim as she followed the staff down to the second floor. From the day Imo Jingshan told her to leave the Mo Corporation in 4 days, she knew that once he made up his mind, there would be no turning back. Originally, she had wanted to take advantage of the cooperation with Shine Group to stay by his side for a while longer. However, she didn't expect that the reason he asked her to be his female companion today was to give face to the In family before he mercilessly chased her back to the United States, leaving her father and Uncle Mo speechless. And Shuyan stood by the railing on the second floor, avoiding the crowd's gaze. She picked up her phone and called Imo Jingshan. She could not return to America like this. Everything that had happened tonight meant that if she returned, it would be difficult for her to get close to him again. Imo Jingshan looked at the caller ID and did not pick it up. When the phone stopped vibrating, there were no more calls. The phone fell silent. Imo Jingshan raised his eyes. Because of An Shuyan's earlier nervous expression, he thoughtfully scanned the entire banquet hall. Suddenly, his phone vibrated again. This time, it was Auntie Chen calling. Imo Jingshan's brows moved as he picked up the call. "Mr. Imo, did Madam go to your company tonight?" Auntie Chen sounded worried. "She didn't go back." "No, it's already so late, and Madam hasn't come back yet. I thought she might have gone to your company to look for you. Her phone is still turned off, and I haven't been able to contact her." Imo Jingshan's gaze quickly scanned the area. His gaze was deep, and it was hard to tell if he was happy or angry. At this moment, a staff member in the banquet hall suddenly reminded, "Distinguished guests, I'm really sorry. The washroom in the banquet hall on the first floor has a circuit failure and cannot be used for the time being. Please move to the second floor or other floors later. The washroom on the first floor is currently closed. It was just a reminder from the staff, and it was just a malfunction in the washroom. It didn't affect anything in the banquet hall. The banquet continued. At this moment, Shu Yan had already returned. Hearing the staff member's reminder, her gaze shifted in Mo Jingshan's direction. CEO Mo, can we have a chat? I don't want to return to America. She approached him and spoke softly. Mo Jingshan did not look at her. Instead, he indifferently turned around, his gaze fixed in the direction of the washroom. The figure who, because of the staff member's words, had suddenly moved in the opposite direction of the washroom. It was Xing Yihan, who had unknowingly appeared in the banquet hall. And Shu Yan stood in front of him, only to discover that the man's gaze was currently examining her. It was heavy, and carried with it an oppressive feeling that caused one to tremble. Mo Jingshan was the type of person who, when one looked at him, would make one involuntarily think of a tree covered in frost when all things were withering in the winter. He stood elegantly in the cold snow, clean, distant, and even cold to the point of being inhuman. However, because he was too good-looking, there was a hint of fickleness to him. However, at this moment, the expression that had always been hidden beneath the high collar of his cultured appearance was no longer as good as before. His lower jaw was slightly taut, and his brows were like the thin snow on the summit of a mountain. It was as though he had torn away the noble and friendly facade of a Vanity Fair, transforming into an icy arrow filled with killing intent. It was as though he would pierce through everything in the next second. And Shu Yan subconsciously raised her hand to grab his sleeve, wanting to make him stay by her side. She stared at him and said in a low voice, CEO Mo, Uncle Mo and my father are calling for you. Mo Jingshan's gaze was frighteningly cold. And Shu Yan's brows furrowed, and her grip on his sleeve tightened. CEO Mo. Let go. Mo Jingshan's cold and heavy voice rang out. Without waiting for Shu Yan's response, he directly pulled his arm out, expressionlessly heading in the direction Xing Yihan had left. And Shu Yan stood stiffly in her spot. She then rushed to lift her skirt and follow. CEO Mo, long time no see. I wonder. Someone by the side saw Mo Jingshan and approached to greet him. Excuse me. Mo Jingshan did not turn back and directly walked past. His gaze was slightly heavy. CEO Mo. And Shu Yan saw that he was about to walk in that direction and was afraid that what she was worried about and suspected had come true. She rushed to grab his wrist forcefully. Tonight is an important banquet for the Mo Corporation and Shine Group. Earlier on, the staff already said that the bathroom on the first floor cannot be used. Right now, there's no one there, however, Mo Jingshan coldly pushed her away. And Shu Yan staggered, reaching out to grab his arm to steady herself. The moment she raised her hand, the man had already walked far away. Everyone in the banquet hall looked over because of the commotion. When Mo Shaozi saw the direction Mo Jingshan was heading toward, his gaze was cold as he heavily slammed the unfinished wine glass in his hand onto the waiter's tray. His brows furrowed harshly. Hearing this, Xing Yihan turned back. His cold and indifferent gaze met Mo Jingshan's. As their gazes met, it was like the collision of icebergs at the North Pole. Xing Yihan's footsteps suddenly paused in front of the bathroom door. A pensive expression flashed past his face, and his lips curved in an unfathomable smile. Mo Jingshan approached, his expression indifferent. It seems like this Mo has not been a good host for tonight's banquet. The hotel's bathroom actually malfunctioned. Why don't Mr. Xing head to the second floor? This Sheng is untalented. I haven't even officially taken a step into the business world, but CEO Mo has already remembered my name and recognized me at a glance. Xing Yihan's tone was light and slow, making it difficult for others to hear his emotions. Chapter 101. What happened? Mo Jingshan's sharp, cold gaze shifted from the direction of the dark bathroom to En Shuyan by his side. En Shuyan did not expect he would actually ask her. This man's observational skills and thoughts were too meticulous to such a frightening degree, I'm not sure. En Shuyan knew she could not hide it any longer and could only softly say, earlier on, I wanted to go to the bathroom, but I felt that this place was not too normal, just not too normal. Mo Jingshan coldly chuckled. En Shuyan, do you not wish to return to America safely? En Shuyan's expression was so stiff that it seemed as though it was about to crack. She lowered her eyes. I'm really not too sure. Mo Jingshan did not pay any more attention to her. His cold gaze once again landed on Xing Yihan. Xing Yihan did not plan on wasting any more time. A trace of worry could still be seen in his eyes. He slowly said, Jin Wan entered the bathroom 25 minutes ago. She still hasn't come out. The moment his words landed, En Shuyan instinctively reached out to hold on to the man's arm. Before her hands could touch him, Mo Jingshan's figure was already several steps away from her. Seeing that the bathroom door was actually locked, Mo Jingshan's jaw tightened. His Adam's apple moved up and down, and his black eyes were so heavy that it seemed as though they could drip water. The moment the bathroom's heavy alloy door was kicked open, the hot bathroom emitted a wave of dampness due to the lack of air conditioning for a long time. Mo Jingshan's brows furrowed tightly. All the doors in the bathroom were left ajar because there was no one inside. Only the innermost door was tightly shut. Hearing the noise, the hotel staff rushed in with a temporary searchlight. After being glanced at by Mo Jingshan's cold gaze, they rushed forward to help open the door. The moment the door opened, they saw Jin Wan, who was dressed in a pink gown, sitting on the toilet seat. Her head was weakly pressed against the wall, and her hands were by her side. The hair on her forehead was wet with sweat, and her eyes were closed. Her face was as pale as paper, and her lips were completely drained of blood. She had already fallen unconscious. En Shuyan followed behind. Seeing this scene, her brows furrowed. This was because Jin Wan's complexion was frighteningly pale. Why is there still someone in the bathroom? The staff members who were not involved in this matter stood at the side in shock and whispered, How long has he been unconscious? Hurry up and call the doctor, don't let anything happen to him. Before the staff member had finished speaking, Mo Jingshan had taken off his suit coldly and carried Jin Wan out. She was cold, and her dress was damp from the suffocation. He wrapped half of her body in his suit, which still contained his body heat, and quickly carried her up. The moment he walked out of the restroom, Mo Xiaozi was already standing outside the door with a frosty expression. Xiao Su's coldness flashed across Mo Jingshan's eyes. Without hesitation, he carried Jin Wan and quickly walked past him. When he passed by Shenmu, who was rushing over, he coldly said, Call Qin Siding and have him scram over here immediately. Shenmu was still confused, not knowing what had happened. When he saw Jin Wan's pale face, he rushed to nod. I'll inform Dr. Qin immediately. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and saw Xing Yihan standing at the back of the crowd with a thoughtful look on his face. Shenmu thought to himself, isn't there a ready-made doctor in front of me? An orthopedic doctor was still a doctor, however, he did not dare to say these words right now. Otherwise, he would not even know how he died. Even if the most eye-catching people tonight were Shine Group and Mo Xiaozi, the true head of the Mo family, Mo Jingshan's existence in Hai Qing could not be ignored. Although he rarely appeared at such banquets and kept a low profile, causing people to be unable to figure out his private life, Mo Jingshan's status in the business world was truly not to be underestimated. Anyone who was involved in the business world, regardless of whether it was in the country or abroad, would definitely pay attention to his every move. Everyone in Haiqing knew that Mo Jingshan's personality was cold and aloof. He was difficult to approach. Aside from his immediate family and friends, no one could easily interact with him. Most people only dared to approach him to exchange pleasantries. To receive a polite smile from him was already considered an honor. A few months ago, there were even rumors that after Mo Jingshan's marriage with the Ji family, he and his new wife, Jin Wan, did not have any relationship. Most insiders believed that he would definitely divorce and marry someone else. However, at this moment, in the bright and resplendent banquet hall, everyone stared at this scene in shock. Mo Jingshan's usual calm and composed expression changed. His brows were cold and threatening. Not only was it rare to see such a clear expression of coldness and anger on his face, they also saw him carrying a woman dressed in a pink gown through the banquet hall with quick steps. Furthermore, this woman was actually the Mrs. Mo who had been rumored by the media to be thrown into the cold palace, Jin Wan. Most of the people present recognized Jin Wan's face, which was so beautiful that it could make even the heavens angry. However, her usually bright complexion was currently excessively pale. And Xu Yan, who had just been the subject of discussion about the possibility of marrying into the Mo family, followed closely behind him with a dark expression on her face. However, she seemed to be completely ignored by him, and he did not even spare her a glance. CEO Mo and Xu Yan followed closely behind Mo Jingshan. Mrs. Mo's gown needs to be changed. I brought a spare set of clothes over. Let me help her change, there's no need. Mo Jingshan's gaze was so cold that it could instantly freeze water into ice. And Xu Yan's footsteps instantly froze. Her expression finally could not hold it in any longer. The guests in the banquet hall were shocked that Mo Jingshan would actually be angered to such an extent for Jin Wan. He did not even give Xu Yan the slightest bit of face. The news that Xu Yan was about to marry into the Mo family was instantly destroyed by Mo Jingshan. After making the call, Shenmu turned back to see Mo Xiaozi approaching with a dark and cold expression. Director Mo, Shenmu respectfully nodded toward him. Mo Xiaozi angrily said, since she fainted, just send her to the hospital. Why did you call Qin sighting over at the hotel? Do you think the commotion here isn't big enough? Are you afraid that the guests won't be able to see enough? Shenmu was silent for several seconds before seriously saying, I'm sorry, Director Mo. I've always been by CEO Mo's side. I'm used to listening to his orders. Mo Xiaozi coldly narrowed his eyes. Shenmu continued, right now, most of the doctors in the nearby hospitals have already left work. There are only emergency doctors and doctors on duty. Everyone in Haiqing knows about Dr. Qin's medical skills. CEO Mo definitely has his own considerations for calling him over. Furthermore, the banquet hasn't ended yet. If CEO Mo directly abandons all the guests and leaves, it might cause more people to feel uncomfortable. Mo Xiaozi's expression was ugly as he stared at him. Shenmu did not wait for him to speak and politely and respectfully nodded toward him. Dr. Qin has already driven over here. I'll wait for him at the door. Chapter 102. Jin Wan had not fainted for too long. She was already feeling unwell, and there was no fresh air in the bathroom. The enclosed space made it difficult for her to breathe. She did not know how she had suddenly fainted. She struggled in the nightmare for a long time. The nightmares from her previous life that had not appeared for a long time were invading her consciousness. Until her body suddenly felt as though it had been soaked in a pool of warm water. Her cold body gradually warmed up, and the uneasiness in the nightmare gradually faded. Below her neck, there seemed to be a strong hand holding the back of her neck. From time to time, her forehead would be covered by another hand, as though testing her temperature. So warm, so comfortable, was this also a dream? Abruptly, Jin Wan opened her eyes. Her gaze seemed to have lost focus. After opening them for a long time, she slowly returned to herself. She turned her head slightly in a daze, looking at the man by the bathtub. The moment she saw Mo Jingshan's face so close to hers, her heart instantly jumped. She watched as the man's brows were tightly furrowed. His gaze was cold and stern, and his hand was still pressed against her forehead. She was startled. She saw that his suit was thrown on the ground not far from the bathroom. The buttons on his shirt were undone from time to time, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing his wrists. However, because he had been using both hands to hold her in the bathtub to prevent her from choking, his sleeves were more or less soaked. However, he did not seem to mind. His gaze was heavy, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. For a moment, Jean Wan could not wrap her head around it. Wasn't she locked in the bathroom? Didn't he not notice that she had come to this banquet? How could it be? She suddenly woke up, and she was right in front of him. Furthermore, he had taken off her clothes, and she was lying in the bathtub just like that. The bathroom door was tightly shut. Various footsteps could be heard from outside, and Shuyan's voice could be heard from outside. "CEO, the clothes I brought are new. Do you want Mrs. Mo to change first?" Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear the voices outside. His cold gaze landed on Jean Wan's pale face. "If you want to come to the banquet, why didn't you directly ask me? What's the meaning of this?" Jean Wan finally gradually returned to herself. The alcohol in her mind continued to wreak havoc, causing her to feel uneasy. Outside, Shuyan was still gently knocking on the door. Jean Wan was silent for a moment before smiling faintly. Her eyes were a little misty from intoxication. "You can come together with Shuyan. Why can't I find someone else?" She did not explain how she came here, nor did she want to explain. As soon as she finished speaking, she felt the man's hand on the back of her neck become full of thorns, and she began to struggle to sit up. "Don't move." Mo Jingshan's voice was low and heavy. His gaze was clear and indifferent as he pressed down on her. Earlier on, the bathroom was damp and humid. "Your body temperature is too low. Soak in the hot water for a while longer." "I'm fine now. Maybe it was just some difficulty breathing before, but I'm much better now." Jean Wan spoke unhurriedly and sat up in the bathtub. She raised her hand to push his hand away, but he held her wrist instead. She struggled again, but to no avail. She could only look up. "I said I'm much better now." She raised her voice. She saw that the man's gaze was fixed on her, not allowing her to avoid him at all. Jean Wan tried hard to calm herself down, but she was still slightly dizzy from the alcohol. "I didn't come tonight on purpose. Furthermore, even if I wanted to come, I'm afraid there's no place for me by your side. The reason I didn't bring you to this dinner party was because I didn't want you to misunderstand." Mo Jingshan more or less softened his tone, but his hand still held onto her wrist without loosening. "Oh, I really didn't misunderstand." Jean Wan lowered her head, no longer looking at him. Mo Jingshan saw that she was sitting in the water. It seemed like she really did not plan to continue soaking. He casually pulled a towel over her head and helped her dry her dripping hair. Jean Wan turned her head away to avoid his hand. She raised her hand to press down on the towel on her head. "I'll do it myself." The man did not speak. His actions continued until he carried her out of the bathtub. At the same time, he pulled over another towel that was larger and wider enough to wrap around her body. He wrapped it around her and carried her out of the bathroom. Jean Wan did not speak the entire time. Only when she was placed on the bed did she instinctively curl up her legs and hide in the bed, invisibly maintaining a distance from him. It could be seen that even though she did not argue, her emotions were already filled with negative emotions. Mo Jingshan pulled the blanket over her, forcing her to lie under it. He then pressed his hand against her forehead and looked at her, speaking solemnly and softly, "Qin Siding will be here soon. I've already asked someone to buy a new set of clothes for you. Lie here and rest first." Jin Wan could tell from this suite that this should be the guest room on the upper floor of King's Court Hotel. There were still hundreds of guests in the banquet hall on the first floor. Tonight was an important dinner party between Mo Corporation and Shine Group. Since she was fine right now, he should take some time to deal with the aftermath. She did not speak and closed her eyes. She did not even want to make a sound. She did not even want to hear a single word of his advice. "Nuan Nuan." The man stood by the bed. His clear and deep voice called out her name. Jin Wan appeared as though she did not hear him. She closed her eyes and did not speak. She did not move, but her hand gripped onto the towel wrapped around her body. Her grip gradually tightened. "How much wine did you drink earlier?" Mo Jingshan stared at her. Earlier, when he carried her into the room, he could smell the scent of several different wines mixed on her body. Although the alcohol content of the wine prepared for the dinner party was not high, the fact that Jin Wan's alcohol tolerance was very low was known by the entire upper class of Hai Qing. She would definitely get drunk after drinking a few glasses. He had seen this a long time ago without her knowing. Furthermore, today, there were several types of wine mixed together. Seeing that she was still using the excuse of being drunk to throw a tantrum, Mo Jingshan placed her handbag on the bedside table. He picked up the phone that had run out of battery and glanced at it. After confirming that it was indeed out of battery, he placed it down. "Be good and rest in the room. Wait for me to come back." After speaking, the man glanced at her again. Seeing that she was currently half-drunk and could not cause any trouble, he directly left the room. Outside the room, and Shu Yen saw that he had finally come out and rushed forward. "CEO Mo, how is Mrs. Mo? Is she all right?" However, Mo Jingshan's expression was cold. He did not pay her any attention and walked down the stairs. Half an hour later, the banquet hall seemed to have returned to normal. Mo Jingshan walked through the crowd. His expression was still calm and impeccable. However, his gaze did not move toward Shuyen. Even when Shuyen walked over to seek his gaze, the look she received made her tremble as though she was sitting on pins and needles. Qin Siding had already arrived. He suddenly approached Mo Jingshan's side and softly mocked, "This old man drove 180 miles per hour to rush over, but your woman is not in the room at all." Mo Jingshan's gaze hardened. His silent and cold gaze subconsciously scanned the entire banquet hall. He suddenly laughed coldly. Chapter 103. In the room, the towel was tossed onto the bed. Jin Wan's cell phone and other items remained untouched on the bedside table. The room service staff explained by the side, "Earlier on, I only brought the clothes I bought for Mrs. Mo and then went to clean the other rooms. I didn't notice the commotion here." Qin Siding crossed his arms and leaned against the door. He snorted. "Since you still have the ability to slip away, I think your woman should be fine. Based on her physical condition, aside from her fear of the cold, she doesn't have any other problems. She's very healthy." As he spoke, Qin Siding raised his chin, using his gaze to point toward the window. "Isn't that right? She still has the strength to jump out of the window." Mo Jingshan had long noticed the open window and the fluttering curtains. His expression did not reveal the slightest hint of anger. His gaze was indifferent, as though he did not have any emotions. Qin Siding appeared eager to watch the show. He walked to the window and casually glanced outside, chuckling softly. No wonder she didn't take the usual route today. There's a very tall tree outside the window. A child can jump down without getting hurt. in a bar half a city away from King's Court Hotel. Jean Wan sat in a secluded corner. The wine glasses on the table were arranged in a row. She had drunk 2 glasses. It was not bad. She raised her hand to rub her nose, expressionlessly reaching for another glass. This was a leisure bar, a type of bar. Most of the customers were refined people who listened to music and drank. It was not as messy as ordinary bars. Not far away, there was only a young man hugging a guitar and singing a sad ballad. The more he sang, the sadder he became. The more he sang, the lower his voice became. Jean Wan, who had been trying hard to calm down, was stirred up bit by bit. She couldn't help clenching the wine glass tighter and tighter. She had run out of the hotel to calm herself down. Otherwise, she was afraid that she would not be able to control her emotions. She really wanted to grab Mo Jingshan's collar and interrogate him. In her previous life, after their divorce, did he spend every day within Shuyan when he went to America? That 10 years of his life that she could not even touch. He was the powerful Shine Group's global CEO. Everything about him was impossible for her to know. The distance between them was so far, so far. And in those 10 years, who was it that walked so closely with him? Was it In Shuyan? Was it Ji Mengran? Or was it a woman thousands of times better than her? But she could not ask. If she did, she would only be treated as a lunatic. A lunatic who spoke nonsense that others could not understand. Shine Group CEO Mo Jingshan has returned to the country today. He has already arrived in Haiqing. What are you looking at? Do you know who that person in the news is? A woman like you probably doesn't even have the qualifications to carry his shoes. The last few words she heard before she died in her previous life suddenly rang in her ears. G Group's GG. Suddenly, she felt like she was in an ice-cold prison. Everything around her was icy cold. That kind of helpless struggle and the feeling of suffocation from the poison were all surrounding her. It was so cold that her teeth were chattering. Not far away, there were 2 men who were listening to music and drinking. They were dressed like elite white-collar workers of the upper class. They noticed the sound of a bottle falling to the ground in the corner. The 2 men looked back and saw a slender and fair woman hugging her knees and curling up on the sofa. Her face was buried in her knees, and her body was trembling imperceptibly, as if she was very cold. "Miss, are you all right?" The 2 men walked over, asking in concern. Jean Wan clenched her fists. She raised her eyes. The moment they saw her face, the 2 men were stunned. After a long while, they said in surprise, "G. Miss G." Although Jean Wan had drunk, she could recognize them. They seemed to have worked with the G family's company. It didn't matter who they were, she couldn't be bothered to think about it. She only glanced at them coldly before burying her face in her knees again. The 2 men saw that she seemed to have drunk too much. She was quiet and depressed. She did not look like the arrogant and domineering Mississippi. The 2 of them asked worriedly, "Miss G, did you drink too much? Do you need to contact someone from the G family to pick you up?" In the end, the 2 of them had yet to finish speaking when Jean Wan suddenly raised her head. She asked expressionlessly, "Do you want to drink?" The 2 of them. To be able to sit and drink with the G family's miss, it was truly a blessing of 3 lifetimes, all right? Who would refuse? Even if it was just drinking, this was definitely a huge temptation to men. Furthermore, they could take the opportunity to curry favor with the G family. Only a fool would refuse. Half an hour later. Jean Wan's eyes were no longer red. Her sad mood was also gone. She began to speak in all sorts of smiles. She clinked glasses with the 2 of them, and as she drank, she raised her hand and pointed at the people singing in the stands not far away. Let me tell you, I've turned over a new leaf. If it was in the past, if I saw such a handsome and good singer in a bar, I would definitely go and tease him, also. She smiled and narrowed her eyes. She raised her finger and pointed in a circle. Do you know who the boss behind this bar is? Shoo, let me tell you. As Jean Wan spoke, she raised her finger and placed it by her lips. Her eyes were hazy as she giggled. The boss here is, I'm sorry, she can't drink anymore. The wine that was about to reach Jean Wan's lips was suddenly intercepted by a hand. Mo Jingshan's expression was as heavy as water. He pulled Jean Wan, who was sitting paralyzed on the sofa and giggling foolishly, into his arms. He did not look at the two people's awkward and bewildered expressions as they realized who he was. He half dragged, half carried her up. He even kicked the coffee table in the middle of the sofa away and directly brought Jean Wan away. Jean Wan, whose brain had been completely washed by alcohol, was completely unaware of what had happened. She even waved at the passing waiter, vainly trying to get another glass of wine to drink. I still want to drink. You're already this drunk after just a few glasses. Do you think you'll ever have the chance to touch this in this lifetime? Mo Jingshan's expression was heavy as he brought her out of the bar. His hand forcefully wiped Jean Wan's face, wiping away the wine stains on her lips. As he wiped, Jean Wan dodged, refusing to cooperate at all. Be more obedient. His tone was low and filled with anger. At this moment, a white luxury car that had been quietly parked on the opposite side of the road started its engine and drove away. Mo Jingshan watched as the car left. His gaze instantly turned bone-chilling. He then glanced at Jean Wan, who was disobediently trying to struggle out of his hands. Chapter 104. She remembered that she was brought out by Xing Yihan. She also remembered that she wanted to find a place to calm down. When she got out of the car nearby, she warned Xing Yihan not to follow her. However, she did not expect him to find her so quickly. Do you want to get in the car yourself, or do you want me to carry you in? Mo Jingshan's cold voice carried a hint of sternness. However, he did not let go of her, in case she ran away like a rabbit. There were cars passing by nearby. If they were not careful, they would be in danger. Jean Wan stood in the same spot without moving. Right now, not only did she not want to get in the car, she also wanted to take off her shoes and throw them at his face. Seeing that she was standing there like a statue, Mo Jingshan's hand directly wrapped around her waist. Jean Wan's gaze turned to him, pausing on the well-tailored and well-made long coat he was wearing. He only had a shirt inside. There was no suit. Oh, that's right. Previously, he gave her the suit to wear. It seemed to have been thrown in the bathroom. It was worth a lot. Just the price of that suit alone was enough to buy a 200 square meter house in the capital 10 years later. Right now, the coat he was wearing was even more expensive. She looked at the man's cold and handsome face and suddenly smiled. In the past 10 years that seemed like a dream, and in the recent days that they spent together, she had never thought about what kind of man she had married. How high was he that even Jean Wan was not worthy of him? How good was he to make her go from a firm goal in the beginning to a stage where she was gradually afraid of losing him? Jean Wan stared at him, using a voice slightly hoarse from the alcohol to ask, "Is the banquet over?" "Not yet." Since she asked, he answered, but his tone was slightly heavy. Jean Wan's heart ached. She lowered her head. "Then go back. I just want to come out to calm down. I don't want to hold you up. Calm down. You jumped out the window and ran so far to drink just to calm down." Mo Jingshan's hand around her waist was almost pressing her into his body. It was slightly heavy, and it hurt slightly. Jin-Wan furrowed her brows and pushed him. We are on the street. There are cars passing by. Be careful. Go back to the banquet. I'll take a taxi back to Aolon International. As she spoke, she suddenly used force to push the man away. Jin-Wan turned around and really reached out to hail a taxi. Stop. The man's deep and cold voice rang out. Jin-Wan acted as though she could not hear him. She ignored him, her hand still reaching forward. It was only when a taxi approached and was about to stop in front of her that her waist and wrist suddenly tightened. The world spun around her as Mo Jingshan pushed her into the car he had driven over by the roadside. It wasn't the business car he had taken to the King's Court Hotel tonight, but the black ghost that she was very familiar with. Her back bumped hard against the car door. Although it was not painful, Jin-Wan instinctively put on a defensive look. Before she could speak, Mo Jingshan bent down and kissed her on the lips. There was only a faint taste of champagne in his mouth. It was mellow and pleasant, and his unique, cool aura caused Jin-Wan's mind to feel as though a string that had been stretched taut suddenly snapped. She suddenly raised her hand to push him away, but he pressed both her arms against the car door. It was a very forceful press. His wrist was almost broken by him. She had never seen Mo Jingshan with such a temper. Jin-Wan hadn't thought it through before. At this moment, she roughly understood why Mo Jingshan had never been affected by Ji Mingran's indirect attacks. It was probably because he had known many things about her and her past since a long time ago. So, was it because of Xing Yihan? She had yet to do anything with him because of An Shuyan. What right did he have to have a temper? She did not know when this kiss would end. The cold wind blew past. Jin-Wan was trapped between his chest and the car. Because of him, she could not feel the cold air. Finally, her legs began to weaken. Mo Jingshan placed a hand on her waist, supporting her weak body that was about to slip. Jin-Wan's drunkenness had yet to dissipate. She was kissed until her vision was blurry and she could not speak. She could only hear the man's clear voice by her ear. I haven't even settled the debt with you, and you've already given me a good show of jumping out of the window. Jin-Wan, you've grown up. Jin-Wan abruptly raised her head. The car door was abruptly opened, and her entire body was pushed inside. Her body fell onto the seat without any resistance. She scrambled to sit up, but he had already walked around the car and sat in the driver's seat. He locked the door and did not give her a chance to alight. Mo Jingshan. Can't anyone throw a temper? I came out to drink because I was in a bad mood. It's not like I fought or threw a tantrum. What right do you have to treat me so harshly? Jin-Wan turned around and shouted at him. Her breathing was hurried, and her chest was heaving. She glared at him. Mo Jingshan was neither cold nor warm. You should be thankful that the one drinking with you earlier wasn't that illegitimate son of the Xing family. Otherwise, I'll let you know what it means to truly go overboard. He directly drove the car away. However, not long after, Jin-Wan felt a wave of nausea from drinking too much tonight. She raised her hand to her mouth as though she was about to vomit. Mo Jingshan stopped the car and finally unlocked the car. Jin-Wan rushed to push open the door and staggered out of the car. She squatted by the side of the road and retched. She had not eaten anything tonight. Apart from alcohol, there was nothing else she could vomit. Her throat was burning. Her heart was uncomfortable, and her entire body was uncomfortable. Sensing the man's approach, Jin-Wan squatted by the side of the road and said weakly, If I take the car again tonight, I'll definitely vomit again. My stomach isn't feeling well. Go back to the banquet first. Don't worry about me. Before she could finish her words, the man abruptly lifted her up by the waist. The moment Jean Wan's feet and body left the ground, her two hands instinctively grabbed his collar. Her half-drunk, half-awake eyes met emotions that were as deep as the sea. "How can I not care about you?" The man's voice was low and indifferent. There was a hint of helplessness in his tone toward her current state. When Jingxian forcefully brought her into the nearest hotel, Jean Wan was unable to resist, both physically and mentally. On one hand, she really did not want to take the car again. Her stomach was filled with alcohol, and her stomach was churning with the urge to vomit. On the other hand, when she came out, she did not bring her bag, money, or cell phone. If she was really left here, she would most likely only be able to sleep by the roadside. Even if she was drunk, she could still understand the logic of being under someone else's roof. Furthermore, under Jingxian's diamond and gold-rimmed roof, there was no way she would court death. Chapter 105. Jean Wan abruptly took a step back. Her expression was solemn as though saying, "I want to keep my distance from you." Her entire body was like a porcupine as she attempted to retreat further. Jingxian glanced at her. "Why don't you try taking another step back?" Jean Wan did not speak. She turned around and leaned against the wall of the elevator. If she was drunk, she would just drink. But now that she was drunk, she was like a punching bag. After exiting the elevator and entering the room, Jean Wan directly slipped inside. She still insisted on keeping her distance from Jingxian. Jingxian raised his hand to press against his brows. He then looked at her expression. His black eyes stared at her as he unhurriedly unbuttoned his expensive and exquisite cufflinks. He softly and indifferently said, "You're drunk. I won't bicker with you. Come here." Jean Wan stood by the window warily. She leaned against the curtains as though only then could she feel some sense of security. "I'm not drunk." She raised her voice to defend herself. "I told you to come here." Jingxian's heavy voice cut her off. Jean Wan leaned against the curtains, her hands gripping the fabric tightly. Her gaze landed on her toes as she softly emphasized, "I said I'm not drunk, so I'm not drunk." Jingxian, you can't rely on my good temper to stop me from finding a quiet place to stay. Besides, your temper is good. Jingxian smiled imperceptibly. Jean Wan, wasn't her current temper good enough? "You're not drunk." He coldly smiled again. Jean Wan, she did not care. In any case, she was not drunk. "All right. Since you're not drunk, let's have a good chat about tonight's matters." Jingxian's low and cold voice approached. Jean Wan watched as he approached and subconsciously leaned against the window behind her. "If you take another step back, that window that isn't tightly closed will open. This is the 18th floor. Do you want to fall?" He spat out each word without any warmth. Jean Wan's heart skipped a beat. Earlier on, she felt a cold breeze on her back. She turned back to see that the window behind the curtains was indeed not tightly shut. There was still a gap, and a little wind was leaking in from it. She was silent for a moment before reaching behind to pull the window inward. As she closed it completely, she suddenly felt the man's cool scent approaching. Jean Wan turned her face away, refusing to look at him. Seeing that she was clearly going to continue ignoring him, Jingxian's perfect jaw tightened. In the next second, he grabbed her wrist and pressed it against the bay window behind her. Jean Wan sensed his pressure and abruptly looked up at him in shock. She took a step back and leaned against the glass behind her. However, just as she was about to struggle, the man's cell phone suddenly rang. The melodious ringtone rang one after another. She didn't need to guess to know that the banquet hadn't ended yet. Regardless of whether the call was from Shuyan or Mo Shaoza, it had nothing to do with her. "Your phone is ringing," Jean Wan reminded. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear anything and continued to stare at her. Being stared at by him, Jin Wan felt goosebumps all over. Seeing his cell phone ring a few times, he stopped, and then continued to shout. A few seconds later, she raised her hand to touch his coat, took out his cell phone, and saw a string of numbers that had not been saved in his address book. However, Jin Wan also recognized that it was Shuyan's number. That night, she had only seen it once, but she had remembered it with her woman's instincts. She looked at him with a hint of a smile and handed the cell phone to him. "It's your secretarian." However, Mo Jingshan coldly pushed away the cell phone she had raised. When Jin Wan glared at him, he directly snatched the cell phone from her hands and mercilessly threw it behind him. Pang! With a thud, the phone fell heavily on the slightly reflective golden tile floor, and the incessant ringing also came to an abrupt end. Mo Jingshan was the type of man who did not need to show any expression of anger. Just a mild and cold glance was enough to cause fear in people's hearts. Although Jin Wan was not afraid, the instant the cell phone landed on the ground, her mind went blank for a moment. "My secretarian." He chuckled coldly. Who gave her the right? Jin Wan returned to her senses. She turned to look over his shoulder at the shattered cell phone on the ground. Although it was not the one she had bought with her, she could not help but take a few more glances. "I'll say it one more time." His gaze landed on her face. Every word clearly entered her ears. "Right now, you're not sober enough. There's no need for us to argue. We'll talk after you wake up tomorrow. Be obedient, N." His gaze was clearly cold, and he clearly carried dissatisfaction. However, due to Jin Wan's gaze, he still softened his voice to avoid scaring her. Previously, Jin Wan had been stained with the smell of alcohol in that bar. The smell was not pleasant, so she went to take a shower. Because she did not want to face Mo Jingshan for now, she took a long time to shower before coming out. She wrapped the towel tightly around her body and put on a bathrobe. After ensuring that she was completely covered from head to toe, she walked out of the bathroom. She scanned the room but did not see Mo Jingshan's figure. Did he return to the dinner party? Jin Wan slowly pulled up the bathrobe on her body. She walked to the window and opened it. The thick bathrobe could barely withstand the chilly night wind. It was already very late. The corridors of this hotel were quiet, and there was no one walking back and forth. Outside the window, the night was quiet. Only the occasional headlight of a passing car would flash by. From the 18th floor, she could almost see half of Hai Cheng's bright lights. She finally sobered up a little. She also clearly confirmed that what she wanted now was indeed more than before. If it was a month ago, when she had just woken up in the bridal room, she would not have cared about the words of those people today, including Shuyan's existence. What she wanted was the identity of Mrs. Mo. What she wanted was to be able to protect everything she had lost and not repeat the same mistakes. What she wanted was to live a good life again. But earlier, she really minded it. She minded it to the point where even she was shocked. Tonight, she might really be a little emotional. When she came out, she did not even think twice and directly boarded Xing Yihan's car. Usually, even if a knife was held to her neck, she might not have done it. Jin Wan rubbed her forehead, suddenly feeling a little regretful. She had really lived 2 lives in vain. As someone who had experienced almost everything, her mental fortitude was actually not strong enough. Chapter 106. The man stood by the door. Seeing that she was standing there unmoving, wrapped in a towel and bathrobe like a bloated snowman, his cold brows immediately furrowed. "Come here," he said mildly. His tone was indiscernible. Jin Wan remained standing there unmoving. She had thought that he had returned to the banquet, but it turned out that he had gone to buy food for her. You had an accident in the bathroom last night. Your entire body is cold and unconscious. Right now, you're standing by the window to enjoy the wind. Do you want to fall sick? Mo Jingshan's voice was heavy. Close the window and come here. Jin Wan was indeed slightly cold. Earlier, she had only thought that the wind would clear her mind. Seeing that Mo Jingshan's gaze had grown colder, she raised her hand to close the window. Walking over, she lowered her eyes to look at the takeout in his hands. Just by smelling it, she could tell that it was her favorite dishes. She raised her eyes to see that Mo Jingshan was glancing at the bathrobe she was wearing. He did not seem as cold as before. You didn't return to the banquet. Jin Wan cleared her throat, speaking unnaturally. I thought. Mo Jingshan reached out to touch her face. Jin Wan paused, raising her eyes to look at him. Her skin was ice cold. He did not speak, his cold brows furrowing. His warm palm rubbed her face until Jin Wan's expression was no longer as stiff and her face was no longer as cold. Only then did he place the takeout in his other hand on the table by the side. And Shu Yan alone has already angered you to this extent. If I were to return now, I'm afraid that you would even dare to jump from the 18th floor. Mo Jingshan's tone was cold. Jin Wan. I'm not that desperate. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, raising her chin with his hand. His clear, cold eyes watched her. You've sobered up. When I showered earlier, I sobered up quite a bit. Jin Wan tried to turn her face away, but he still held her chin, preventing her from looking away. She raised her eyes to meet his. The man's gaze was slightly dark. He stared at her for a long time. What happened to Xingyihan? Jin Wan lifted her eyelids, her tone slightly unconcerned. I have nothing to do with him. He has always been Xia Tian's doctor. When I visited Xia Tian at the hospital, it was inevitable that we would cross paths. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was only watching her coldly, she could not help but furrow her brows and continue to explain. He is about to return to the Xing family. He invited me to attend the banquet. Originally, I did not know what kind of banquet it was and did not want to come. But in the end, I was brought here. I was afraid that there was something strange, so I did not enter. Then I saw you and Shu Yan. As she spoke, Jin Wan glanced at him. Even if she didn't speak, her meaning was clear. What she meant was that she did not dress up as anyone's female companion, nor did she want to have too much to do with Xingyihan. Bye. From. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many things happening tonight. And. Eat first. He placed his hand down and opened the takeout on the table. The exquisite, translucent box contained Jin Wan's favorite Chinese dishes and pastries. There was also a glass of hot fruit juice. Jin Wan was originally angry, but now that she had sobered up, she could not throw a tantrum. She sat down, picked up her chopsticks, and took a bite. How did you know I didn't eat? She asked casually as she ate. Her eyes were fixed on the food in front of her and did not look at the man by her side. Earlier, when you vomited outside, you could only vomit out wine. If I can't tell, how can I be your husband? Mo Jingshan saw that she was still tactful. He saw that she knew not to make things difficult for her body and stomach. His tone softened and was no longer as cold. Jin Wan's mouth was still full of food. She paused and suddenly used her chopsticks to poke at the rice. She mumbled, "So you still know whose husband you are?" Mo Jingshan's brows moved. He rubbed her head as though comforting her and chuckled softly. Hearing that he was actually laughing, Jin Wan forced herself to swallow the food in her mouth. She raised her head and glared at him. Mo Jingshan, even if I'm sober, it doesn't mean that my anger has dissipated. You can still laugh. So, are you feeling wronged? He was still smiling, his finger already touching her angry brows. She was not wronged. She was angry. Mo Jingshan was the only legitimate successor of the Mo family. He was also the most favored successor. As long as he nodded his head, no one could stop him from obtaining everything. Furthermore, the Mo family's foundation had always been stable. There was no need for the in-family support. It was still a giant among the American Chinese businesses. Their position would not be shaken in the slightest. No matter how she thought about it, the relationship with the in-family was just a mutually beneficial one. Everything was just Mo Jingshan's father's one-sided wish. However, those people made it sound as though Mo Jingshan not marrying in Shuyan was his loss. Which woman would not be angry after hearing this? To prevent this little woman from being filled with anger, Mo Jingshan sat by her side and placed the cup of hot fruit juice in front of her. His voice was clear and heavy as he patiently explained, "Do you still remember my promise to let Secretary and return to America in a week?" Jean Wan choked for a moment. She rushed to take the juice and drank a mouthful before barely managing to calm down. Mo Jingshan's hand gently rubbed her back. As he helped to calm her down, he softly said, "The collaboration between the Mo Corporation and Shine Group was originally supposed to be completed in 2 weeks. However, I forcefully limited it to a week. Recently, I've been working overtime in the office, attending meetings, and attending too many projects. This is also the reason." Jean Wan was startled. "Because of me, you compressed the work that was supposed to be completed in 2 weeks into a week?" Mo Jingshan smiled. "My father did indeed plan on keeping in Shuyan in High City. However, I have a rough understanding of the in-family and in Shuyan situation. Tonight was a trap set up for them. Every step was within the plan. The goal was to successfully send in Shuyan back to America and not form a grudge with the in-family because of this." Seeing that Jean Wan's gaze was somewhat apologetic, he smiled mildly. "After all, the Mo family and the in-family have been friends for many years. I can't let the two families' elders' faces become too ugly. That's why the scene you saw tonight happened." Jean Wan finally realized that her jealousy tonight was a huge mistake. She awkwardly and apologetically said, "Tonight, I actually didn't see anything. What she saw was in Shuyan appearing together with Mo Jingshan as his female companion." Regardless of what the others said or did, Mo Jingshan and Shu Zhu did not act too intimately. Chapter 107. Jean Wan pursed her lips. "Then why didn't you tell me beforehand?" Mo Jingshan glanced at her meaningfully, his hand lifting her chin. His brows were low and deep as he chuckled. "Before everything ends, I didn't want you to feel any psychological pressure." Jean Wan's heart instantly melted like the first snow in the winter. If she had known that Mo Jingshan had been so busy these past few days only because he had promised to do all of this within a week, she would indeed feel some psychological pressure. She would also ask herself if she was being too unreasonable. "I'm sorry." Jean Wan's biggest mistake was neglecting to trust him. She felt very apologetic in her heart. "Actually, regarding Secretary Anne's matter, I don't really mind. I know that you don't have any feelings for her, and you're very magnanimous." Mo Jingshan seemed to have seen through her thoughts. He said with interest, "Jumping out of the window, climbing a tree, and drinking to drown your sorrows, I'm afraid there isn't a woman more magnanimous than you in this world." Before Jean Wan could feel ashamed, the man's hand had already hooked a strand of her slightly damp hair on her shoulder, asking softly, "Are you full?" And Jean Wan was really in the wrong today. She quietly nodded, allowing his hand to gently stroke her shoulder. His posture was leisurely and careless. His slender fingers casually curled up a strand of her hair. Now it's my turn to eat. Then you eat. I didn't eat much. Jin-won raised her hand to tidy up the lunchbox on the table. She took out a new set of cutlery and pushed it in front of him. However, the man chuckled softly. Without even glancing at the food on the table, he pressed her against the side of the table and slowly kissed down her neck. Jin-won's body was filled with the fragrance of shower gel. Her body was wrapped in a towel and bathrobe. It was so tight that he wished he could tear it apart. It was tempting to crush her into his stomach. Jin-won's entire body softened from his kiss. She almost drowned in his embrace. When Immo Jingshin's kiss landed on her lips, Jin-won was shocked to find that Immo Jingshin's kiss was becoming deeper and more seductive. He kissed the corner of her mouth, then her burning cheeks, and then bit her earlobe. His breath fell on her earlobe. I've been working overtime these days and haven't had enough sleep. How are you going to make it up to me? Jin-won leaned against his shoulder, feeling the heat of his body. As the sensitive spot by her ear was stimulated again and again, she softened in his arms. What do you want? She leaned on his shoulder, tilted her head slightly, and gazed at him with her watery eyes. If you're really tired, how about I give you a massage before going to bed? She thought it was a good idea, so she raised her hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Do you want a massage? The room was very quiet. The moonlight outside the window and the neon lights of the city were blocked by the curtains. Immo Jingshin held her raised hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss it. You're helping me bathe. He raised his eyebrows and chuckled. Jin-won nodded without hesitation. All right. Wash your entire body, he emphasized. All right. Jin-won nodded again. The expression on her face could not be any more natural. It was rare for her to be so cooperative. Immo Jingshin's elegant brows moved. He smiled and stood up to head to the bathroom. Jin-won followed him in and turned on the bathroom lights. After thinking for a moment, she asked, at this time, the dinner party, don't you need to go? Immo Jingshin removed his coat, unhurriedly unbuttoning his shirt. 1 button, 2 buttons, 3 buttons, everything that requires me to appear personally is more or less done. As for the follow-up of the project, Shin-moo and the vice president of the company will be there. Even if I stay there, I'll only be there to calm my father down. Immo Jingshin's tone was mild. But if you don't stay there, will Director Immo? Jin-won paused. She did not plan on mentioning the incident in the bathroom tonight. She and Immo Jingshin had a tacit understanding of the instigator of that incident. She was very clear that with Immo Jingshin around, aside from Immo Xiaoza, no one else would dare to give such an order. Immo Jingshin unbuttoned another button. His voice was much lower and colder. Initially, I did plan to leave him some face. But now, there's no need. As soon as he finished speaking, the man turned around. Beneath his completely unbuttoned shirt was a chest that could make a woman's mouth go dry instantly. The lines of the man's body were perfect, and every part of him was indescribably seductive. These 2 words should not be used to describe a man, but it was not an exaggeration to use them on Immo Jingshin. Jin-won's gaze trembled from the visual impact. She recalled what she had promised earlier and took the initiative to help him remove his shirt. 2 minutes later. Immo Jingshin's light lips curved slightly. He watched the little woman whose hand had paused on his belt. Continue. Jin-won, when Immo Jingshin said to take a bath, he would really take a bath. Jin-won thought that she would be eaten up and wiped clean by him in the bathtub. In the end, when she began to scrub the great CEO Mo's body from top to bottom, he remained as still as a mountain. He only glanced at her meaningfully from time to time but did not do anything. After working overtime for several days straight, he was most likely really tired. Jin-won did not want to waste any more of his rest time. She took the initiative to help him dry his body and was about to leave. However, Mo Jingshan suddenly held on to her waist and pulled her into his embrace. Following that, Jin-won heard his voice that had been suppressed for a long time. "You still want to leave?" Jin-won's arm pressed against his already dried chest. She glanced back. "If I don't leave, what else can I do? It's already so late. Furthermore, you seem very tired." Without waiting for her to finish speaking, the man pressed her heavily into his embrace. His kiss landed on her neck, and he gently bit down on the skin on the back of her neck. It was no wonder the ancients would always reveal the neck when beheading someone. The back of a human's neck was naturally weak and sensitive. Jin-won felt as though he had bitten down on her nerve center. The sensitive signal immediately exploded in her consciousness and traveled down her body. Half of her body was already numb. Mo Jingshan tightened his grip. "Originally, seeing that your body wasn't feeling too well today and that you suffered in the bathroom, I was considering letting you off. However, you even brought out the ability to jump out of the window. That's fine. According to what you're saying, your man only worked overtime for a few days, yet his strength to make love is affected. That's not what I meant. What I meant was..." Her sophistry had yet to leave her mouth when she was carried up by him. Mo Jingshan directly pressed her against the bathroom wall. Jin-won was squeezed between the wall and him. Both her legs were forced to wrap around his waist. She had helped him shower earlier, and the towel and bathrobe on her body were mostly wet. He reached out to undo the cumbersome things on her body. Since they were all wet and heavy, there was no need to wear them anymore. Chapter 108. However, no matter how she tried to hide or how she begged for mercy, Mo Jingshan did not plan on letting her off easily tonight. His body pressed tightly against hers. Remembering that Jin-won was wearing the gown Shin Yi-han had prepared for her today, he narrowed his eyes and abruptly flipped her around. Jin-won's back was facing him. Feeling his kiss land on the sensitive part of her neck again, she couldn't help but twist her body. The man behind her let out a muffled groan and began to deliberately bite the back of her neck. Sometimes it was light, sometimes it was heavy, but it was as if he wanted to kill her. Furthermore, at the moment when Jin-won was about to cry, he did not hesitate to barge in from behind. Jin-won directly cried out. As she trembled uncontrollably, he leaned down by her ear. "You and the Xing family's man don't ever see each other again, and..." "See, no, he's also a doctor." Jin-won was so agitated that she could not complete her sentence. "What?" When Mo Jingshan heard her first word, his actions became harsher. Jin-won was bullied to the point where she could not think. She rushed to say, don't see, never again. I never planned on having anything to do with him." Mo Jingshan no longer planned on letting her off. No matter how she tried to explain or act coquettishly, he did not let up. The curtains in the room were half opened. Light shone in from the back. The man's upper body was bare, and his figure was smooth. This was the scene that Jin-won saw when she opened her eyes. After a night of entanglement, she was tired and weak. She did not want to move at all. Even though the sun was already high in the sky, she did not bring her phone with her. Mo Jingshan's phone could no longer be used. It was rare for them to have such a quiet and undisturbed space. She did not want to ruin it. But last night, she felt that because of her jealousy and her minding, other than dissatisfaction, he seemed especially pleased with himself. At first, she did not notice it. Later on, when she was forcefully pressed onto the bed and her head was about to hit the headboard, she finally heard a hint of delight in his words. In the past, she always wanted a divorce. Later on, she suddenly changed. Step by step, they became successful. However, she remained calm and did not do anything extreme. Last night, he was extremely pleased, right? Because she was really jealous. Jinwan used her eyes to describe the handsome face of the man beside her when he was asleep. When he was asleep, Mo Jingshan's handsome, quiet, and aloof demeanor gave off a sense of approachability. Especially the coldness between his brows that could freeze one's heart and make one tremble at any time. Right now, it was completely gone. Like some kind of expensive and aloof feline, there was actually a little bit of softness in its sleep, making people want to get close to it. Jinwan gently turned over in his arms and looked at him from the front. Seeing that his eyes were still closed, she blinked and raised her hand to trace the man's elegant and deep profile. Mo Jingshan's handsome face was against the light coming in from the window. In the darkness of the light, it appeared warm and dark. Jinwan's fingers carefully and gently caressed his handsome brows, then his closed eyes, and finally his high nose bridge. Her fingers gradually landed on his lips. On the man's pale lips, there was a small bite mark from last night. It was very small and could only be seen from such a close distance. This could not be blamed on her. Who asked him to be so fierce last night? Even if she cried and begged for mercy, it would not work. She was so angry that she could only bite him. Not only did she bite him, but Jinwan's gaze also shifted to his back. Last night, she had even scratched his back harshly several times. Have you seen enough? All of a sudden, the man's low and mild voice rang by her fingers. Jinwan jumped in fright and abruptly retracted her fingers. Mo Jingshan only spoke hoarsely. Without opening his eyes, he reached out and pulled the similarly naked Jinwan into his embrace. His arms tightened around her waist. What time is it now? He hugged her. His voice was slightly sleepy and hoarse. It was indolent and overly sexy. Jinwan glanced out the window. I don't know. From the color of the sky, it should be past 6. His palm pressed against her back, gently patting it. You only ate so little last night. Are you hungry? Jinwan wanted to say that she had expended so much energy last night. Right now, she was indeed awakened by hunger. However, being hugged by him like this, she would rather starve than get up. No, I'm still sleepy. She buried her head in his embrace, speaking softly and coquettishly. The man's light chuckle came from above her head. It was very light. His hand caressed the back of her head. Then continue sleeping. This time, Jinwan did not sleep well. Perhaps it was because Mo Jingshan did not continue sleeping. She was the only one on the bed. Less than an hour later, she woke up again. The moment she sat up, she saw Mo Jingshan dressed in a dark brown bathrobe. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling bay window, slender and silent. She was about to lift the blankets and get off the bed when she recalled that her clothes from yesterday were all wet in the bathroom. They had also been pulled onto the floor by him. Right now, they were most likely all bunched up and could not be worn again. Her gaze shifted and saw Mo Jingshan's clothes on the sofa not far from the bed. She quietly reached over, picked up a shirt, and put it on. Then, she tiptoed barefoot to the bathroom. Mo Jingshan sensed her movements. He turned around and saw that the little woman was wearing his shirt. Her entire leg was exposed, it was as white and smooth as porcelain. From time to time, he would be able to see the scenery under the shirt with a single step. Jinwan did not notice that he had already discovered that she was awake. She softly entered the bathroom and quietly closed the door. She picked up the clothes on the floor and placed them on the glass countertop by the side. She then reached out to wash her face. The effects of last night's alcohol had completely dissipated. Ji-Wan thought about what happened at the banquet last night as she picked up the facial cleanser provided by the hotel and rubbed it in her hands. The bathroom door was made of a translucent frosted material. A black shadow approached from the door. Ji-Wan's movements faltered. She raised her head to see that the door had opened. Mo Jingshan's dark eyes were slightly lowered as he looked at her. His expression was calm and unhurried, but he blocked the bathroom door completely. The bathroom in this hotel was not as big as the one at home. The door also appeared much smaller compared to his height. Although the door was clearly blocked, Ji-Wan strangely felt that between his brows, there was a lingering emotion from last night's events, especially his usually cool and indifferent gaze. At this moment, it was as though there was a fire that was about to burn the shirt on her body. Ji-Wan paused and subconsciously tightened her legs. "You want to use the bathroom? I'll go out after washing my face." As she spoke, she raised the foam in her hands. "It'll be done in a moment." Mo Jingshan watched her, slowly and hoarsely making an N sound. He took 2 steps in. Dash. Chapter 109. Mo Jingshan dragged her over, pressing her against the glass countertop. He lowered his head to kiss her, gently nibbling and sucking on her lips. His sudden kiss caused Ji-Wan's legs to soften. She almost lost her balance. Her entire body was enveloped by his scent. The man's scent was cold and persistent, possessing his unique warmth. She was wearing his shirt, which barely covered her thighs. He only had to lift his eyes slightly to see her tightly pressed legs through the full-length mirror in the bathroom behind her. Mo Jingshan held her even tighter, pressing her against his body as he kissed her even more deeply. The bathroom was small, and the temperature climbed. Steam rose, and the sound of water splashing could be heard from the tap. He pressed the back of her head with one hand and held onto her slender waist with the other, bringing her forward. Ji-Wan was unable to defend herself and could only lean heavily against his embrace. Ji-Wan's hands were still wet with the foam from the facial cleanser. She did not dare to push him away. Her body did not have any support, and the sound of water was by her ears, causing her mind to be in chaos. She suddenly wanted to reach over to turn off the tap. However, the moment she moved, Mo Jingshan mercilessly bit down on the tip of her tongue. Ji-Wan instinctively struggled slightly. She was kissed and dodged to the side, softly crying out. He chuckled mischievously, speaking softly by her ears, "Why are you hiding? Dressed like this, what do you want to do?" Ji-Wan softly panted as she dodged. "Last night, when I helped you shower, my clothes were all wet. If I don't wear yours, don't tell me I can," Mo Jingshan smiled. His eyes were dark and deep, extremely alluring. "There's no one else here, and the air conditioner is warm enough. You can choose not to wear it." Ji-Wan directly glared at him. "I'm not an exhibitionist. Besides, I just wanted to wash my face. I didn't want to do anything." He purposely moved his hand under her shirt. Ji-Wan's entire body trembled from the invasion of his fingers. She only heard the man's teasing voice by her ears. "You didn't want to do anything. Then what's going on here?" Ji-Wan's entire body suddenly stiffened, her face was flushed red. She lowered her head and buried it in his neck. She softly whimpered, her body trembling slightly. Mo Jingshan pushed her up again and again. When she could no longer hold on, he pressed her down harshly. After tossing and turning in the bathroom for a while, he chuckled hoarsely. "Shall we go out?" "Ji-Wan. Put me down first." Mo Jingshan smiled and didn't let go of her. He carried her out. She buried her head in his neck, and her toes curled up because of the place where they were connected. As soon as he put her on the bed, she was pinned under his body. Looking at her long hair spread out, he pulled a strand of it to his lips and kissed it. Jinwan panted softly and could not help but laugh. She raised her hand to pull her hair back, grumbling, "It's so early in the morning and you're already like this. Do you really have to take half my life?" He casually pinched her hair and slid it down her collarbone. When Jinwan couldn't stand the teasing and trembled, he snorted at her reaction and chuckled softly against her ear. "I've been so busy these days that I can only go home after midnight. My woman sleeps by my side and I can only hug her but can't eat her. Can't you let me get back some interest? You can wake me up," he smiled. "I can't bear to." "Then you can bear to do it now. I woke up hungry in the morning. You're still squeezing me like this." Mo Jingshan made an N sound. "Very tired. Then I'll slow down." Jinwan, slow down. He was clearly using a different method to slowly and patiently torment her. Jinwan was tormented by his suddenly slowing movements. Her entire body felt numb and she suddenly raised her body cooperatively. Mo Jingshan raised his brows, abruptly retreating along with her movements. The more she took the initiative to approach, the more he retreated. After going back and forth several times, Jinwan was angered by him. She reached out to push him hard. "Bastard! You're doing this on purpose." Seeing that her charming expression was mixed with anger, Mo Jingshan's lips curved. Abruptly, he sent himself in deeply and heavily. Jinwan had wanted to push him away, but in the blink of an eye, this action caused her to moan. She could no longer say a word as she glared at him. After a long while, she finally managed to catch her breath. She weakly and hoarsely complained, "I've really been tricked by your appearance. You're really a beast." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. "You're dressed like this in front of me. If I'm not moved, then I'm worse than a beast." Jinwan, she was actually speechless. 2 hours later, Jinwan was finally able to climb up from the bed to eat. Mo Jingshan was still considerate enough to push the dining cart the hotel staff had brought into her bedside, saving her from the pain of getting off the bed. After all, right now, her legs were really weak. "In the future, no matter what happens, remember to ask me first. Don't let your imagination run wild and be unhappy, remember?" Mo Jingshan handed the cutlery to her. His gaze was stern as though the ruffian from this morning was not him at all. Jinwan bit on the fragrant and delicious enoki mushroom, raising her eyes to say, "Yesterday, I didn't understand the situation clearly. It's my fault, but you should at least remind me. Otherwise, if it was any other woman, they would not be able to accept it." Mo Jingshan raised his brows. "You still have the energy to discuss right and wrong with me?" "Jinwan, I don't." He snorted but did not tease her further. He allowed her to eat in peace. Only when Jinwan was full did Mo Jingshan's unhurried and calm voice ring out. "Do you remember what you promised me last night?" "And what did I promise?" Jinwan could not remember what she had promised. She raised her eyes in surprise. Mo Jingshan's gaze darkened. His gaze was cold. "You promised not to see Xingyihan again. Are you selectively amnesiac?" She was quiet for a moment before directly asking, "Do you know a lot about me? For example, before we got married, or even a few years earlier?" Mo Jingshan did not answer. His gaze toward her was unfathomable and unfathomable. After a moment, he raised his hand to pinch her cheek. "You have to keep your promises, En. I can do that, but you haven't answered me. Do you really know a lot about my past? But in my impression, before we got married, I didn't have much interaction with the Mo family or you. Previously, when Ji Mengrand mentioned Xingyihan, you automatically ignored it. Later on, you didn't even mention it. But from last night until now, you clearly don't know anything about my past. Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her lips. His warm fingers caressed her lips as he unhurriedly said, "That's not important. You just have to remember, you're Mrs. Mo." Jin Wan's heart shrank from the warmth on her lips. What kind of answer is that? Chapter 110. Jin Wan was slightly stunned. In the next second, he had already kissed her. Why are you kissing whenever you want to, just kissing? Mo Jingshan's words carried a hint of teasing. Was he going to do it again? Could it be that feeding her earlier was just to save up energy? After a kiss, he finally released her. He placed his palm behind her head, pressing against her forehead as he watched her. Mrs. Mo once said, "No one can have any ideas about your man." He lowered his head to admire the moisture in her eyes, watching with satisfaction as she was kissed into a daze. On the other hand, if anyone dares to have any ideas about Mrs. Mo, I definitely won't be polite. Mo Jingshan actually had such a domineering side, yet it did not appear to be intentional. Furthermore, this man's domineering side did not make her unhappy. Instead, it made her instinctively want to express her stance. In the past, her relationship with Xing Yihan had always been a one-sided problem. It had nothing to do with her. Jin Wan stared at him and suddenly took the initiative to hug his shoulders. She raised her head and kissed him harshly on the lips. Under the man's dark and turbulent gaze, she sincerely said, "All right." This one word was so sincere that it was as though she wanted to hand over the little world hidden in her heart to his hands. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes, pressing her down on the bed. Jin Wan fell back, looking at the man on top of her. In front of others, this clear and gentle man was the unapproachable CEO Mo. But at this moment, he was seductive like a fiery and bewitching demon. There was no one else like him. On the other side, even after the banquet ended, and Xu Yan did not see Mo Jingshan return. Everyone in Haiqing knew that Mo Jingshan was a cold and rational person. Yet, this man who was never affected by his emotions actually made an exception for Jin Wan. Early in the morning, and Xu Yan met Mo Shaozi at the staircase of Wangting Hotel. Uncle Mo, and Xu Yan politely nodded at him. Mo Shaozi glanced at her, asking sternly, "Your complexion is so bad. You didn't sleep last night?" And Xu Yan smiled slightly. "I slept. Perhaps I slept too late. My complexion doesn't look good. Everything you've seen and heard in the country these days, is it the same as last night?" Jing Shen is serious about that Jin Wan. Mo Shaozi's expression was dark. And Xu Yan hesitated for a moment and did not speak. Instead, she slowly nodded her head. Mo Shaozi first raised his eyebrows in extreme dissatisfaction, then narrowed his eyes coldly. After a moment, Mo Shaozi said slowly, "Since that's the case, do you still want Mrs. Mo's identity?" And Xu Yan was silent for a long time. She took 2 deep breaths, her gaze filled with stubbornness. "Uncle Mo, what you should be asking me is, do I still want this man, Mo Jingshan?" Without waiting for Mo Shaozi to speak, her voice was soft but firm. "My answer is, I want it." Mo Shaozi looked at her sternly for a long time before finally waving his hand at her. "All right, I understand. Go back and rest." And Xu Yan nodded at him respectfully. "Thank you, Uncle Mo." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around. When Shenmu brought her phone over, Jin Wan was drying her hair in the bathroom. The sound of the wind was too loud. She only knew that Shenmu had brought her bag and Mo Jingshan's things over. When she walked out after drying her hair, Shenmu was respectfully and softly speaking to Mo Jingshan outside the door. "All right, CEO Mo, I understand. Mo Jingshan indicated that he could leave. Shenmu nodded and turned to smile politely at Jin Wan before turning to leave. Neither of us brought our phones. How did Shenmu know we were here? Jin Wan glanced at the back view of him walking toward the elevator. She casually asked as he closed the door. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at her, using his chin to point at the phone in the room. She took her bag and searched for the clothes she wore in the car yesterday, but only the clothes inside. Her coat was still left in Xing Yihan's car. Jin Wan finally realized what was going on. She took her bag and searched for the clothes she wore in the car yesterday. She hesitated for a moment and did not dare to mention Xing Yihan's name. After changing her clothes, she found that her phone had been out of battery since last night. She took out the charger from her bag and placed the phone on the bedside table. However, the moment she charged the phone and turned it on, she heard the sound of several text messages. The first one that popped up on the screen was from an unfamiliar number. Rest well. It was a very ordinary word, but it was so concise that there was not even a punctuation mark. Jin Wan stared at the 4 words, her fingers pausing on the screen. After a long moment of confusion, she finally guessed who it was. She opened the phone's photo album and found the record of Xia Tian's diagnosis. There was a page with Xia Tian's attending doctor's phone number. It was indeed Xing Yihan. All these years, she and Xing Yihan had tacitly ignored each other. Even when they passed each other in the hospital, it was as though they were strangers. He was his orthopedic doctor, and she was her Mrs. Mo. They had long had nothing to do with each other, but now, he suddenly appeared in her sight with ulterior motives. What was the reason? Was it because he was about to officially return to the Xing family? Was it because one of the 4 large families in Hai Qing would belong to him? Was he really, as she had once seen him, hiding a monstrous ambition under his handsome appearance? Mo Jingshan had just made a call to the company. When he turned his gaze back from the window, he saw her thoughtful expression and asked, "What's wrong?" Jin Wan raised her head, her gaze pausing on the man's overly gentle and perfect face. Her expression remained calm, but her fingers quickly moved to delete the message that should not have appeared. Nothing. Mo Jingshan looked at the woman by the bed, narrowing his eyes. The little girl's fingers quickly tapped on the screen of her phone. He only glanced at her indifferently before he strode over and took her phone from her. Jin Wan wanted to reach out to snatch it back but retracted her hand due to the man's indifferent expression. That message had already been deleted. Mo Jingshan was currently looking at the top unread message. It was from Xia Tian. 3 consecutive messages. My Nuan. My little heart has been shocked. I've already been unable to sleep for several days. That Dr. Xing is simply too handsome. After interacting with him for so many days in the hospital, I actually didn't realize how good his looks are. Are you really familiar with Dr. Xing? Does he have unidirectional autism? Otherwise, why is he usually so cold? He doesn't even say a word of superfluous nonsense. With just a glance, he can freeze a person half to death. On account of that face of his, I'll forgive this iceberg. I still can't sleep. Also, this Dr. Xing's facial features are extremely well proportioned. The bridge of his nose is very straight. Isn't it said that a man's nose is directly proportional to his lower body? This iceberg may appear refined in his white coat, but it completely cannot conceal his powerful nature. Sob, my heart is moved, I really want to sleep with him. Nuan, since you've known him before, have you never had feelings for Dr. Xing before? Seeing Mo Jingshan's unperturbed expression, the surrounding temperature clearly dropped several degrees. Jin Wan held her forehead. Chapter 111. Just from these few messages, she felt that her life was about to end soon. Best friends always spoke without restraint. In their messages, they dared to say all sorts of dirty jokes. This was practically stabbing a knife into Mo Jingshan's eyes. Then she saw Mo Jingshan's gaze. It was as though there were knives shooting toward her. His gaze was cold and filled with coldness. Cold rain, autumn frost, snow on the summit of a mountain, and many other words were unable to describe his piercingly cold expression. Cough. Jean Wan raised her hand guiltily to push the loose strands of hair behind her ear, calmly explaining, This is how we women chat in private. We don't care if it's meat or vegetables." Mo Jingshan glanced at her heavily. He still did not return the phone to her. His sharp gaze scraped her from top to bottom. "The way you talk without restraint is to study a man's nose." Jean Wan, although she was not thinking of such a thing, her gaze unconsciously drifted toward Mo Jingshan's nose. She vaguely remembered that when they first got married, because she always resisted this marriage, Xia Tian had earnestly and patiently nagged about how this man Mo Jingshan was and whatnot. She also seemed to have said that Mo Jingshan's nose was tall and straight. Although he looked like an ascetic male god, his size was definitely not small. In any case, she had evaluated Mo Jingshan from all aspects and did not forget to be infatuated with him for several days. She said that it was a waste for Jean Wan to not sleep with a man like this. Her gaze suddenly met Mo Jingshan's. Jean Wan abruptly returned to herself and immediately reached out to snatch the phone back. The private conversations between women have always been nondescript. We talk about whatever comes to our minds. Only you men are allowed to admire a woman's black stockings, beautiful legs, and high heels in the summer, but we women are not allowed to occasionally talk about such topics. Jean Wan tried to defend herself as she tried to snatch the phone back. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her. He raised his hand slightly and brushed the phone away from her hand, not letting her have her way. "When have you ever seen me pay attention to a woman's body below her shoulders?" His tone was unkind. Jean Wan rolled her eyes. "Every day, you toss and turn me. Don't talk about below the shoulders, even below the waist has been seen by you, all right?" Not to mention looking around, he had kissed her from top to bottom, inside and out. Mo Jingshan chuckled coldly at her unreasonableness. "Apart from you, I don't care. In any case, return my phone to me first." Jean Wan could not win against him. She jumped onto the bed barefooted and pounced over to snatch it back. Seeing her pounce on him, Mo Jingshan didn't dodge or raise his hand. When she finally touched the phone, he pressed his arm against her waist and pressed her whole body into his arms. Jean Wan was caught off guard and fell forward. She stumbled so hard that half of her body fell toward him, and her entire face was pressed against the man's chin. She was about to step back with the phone in her hand when the strong arm behind her waist tightened. The man's low voice rang by her ear. "For the sake of the private conversation between you women, Mrs. Mo is even willing to throw herself into your arms. You were clearly the one who suddenly pressed down on my waist." Jean Wan raised her head to explain. The moment she raised her head, her lips brushed past his. She had yet to react when the man held the back of her head and kissed her. She could not stand steadily on the bed. Half of her body was pressed against his. She twisted her waist and held the phone tightly in her hand. This position, she could not tell if it was ambiguous or awkward. In any case, this kiss was not ambiguous at all. Instead, it was more like a punishment. It was so heavy that it robbed her of all her breath. Only when Jean Wan's tongue was numb from the kiss did the man release her. His gaze no longer had any warmth as it landed on her phone. "Before the sky turns dark, arrange for her to be transferred to another orthopedic hospital." This was the undeniable sentence Mo Jingshan said by Jean Wan's lips just as she was about to suffocate from the kiss. "Transfer?" She looked at him. 2 days ago, I did have this intention, but Xia Tian's legs can't move. If she gets hurt during the transfer, you're worried about the person I sent. Mo Jingshan lowered his head, indifferently glancing at her. His goal was to keep her away from Xing Yihan, while her goal was to keep Xia Tian away from that scumbag. Regardless of the reason, it was a good thing for Xia Tian to leave her current hospital. It could be considered as settling the matter once and for all. All right, then. Which hospital should she be transferred to? I'll arrange it. Oh. Jin Wan responded and glanced at him from time to time. He clearly minded those few messages earlier. He minded it a lot. If he had seen Xing Yihan's message, it was likely that it would not be as simple as transferring Xia Tian's hospital. Jin Wan was thankful that her hands were fast enough to delete that message. At the same time, she was cursing that bastard Xia Tian in her heart. She really caused so much trouble. It was fine if she liked to chat dirty jokes with her. She could talk about which muscular male celebrity on the television or which male model with hormones bursting out of control. But she actually talked about Xing Yihan. She had seen people dig holes for their bosom friends, but she had never seen someone dig holes like this. Xia Tian, that idiot. Jin Wan lowered her head. She replied to Xia Tian's message while informing her of the transfer and celebrating that she could finally break free from the iceberg. She then ignored Xia Tian's cries of pain and raised her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan. That's right. She took the initiative to change the topic. At the hospital, there's a bank owner chasing after Xia Tian. But he's a scumbag from head to toe. Can you do me a favor and prevent that man from getting close to Xia Tian again? It's best if he's thrown to Africa and never to return. Mo Jingshan glanced at the woman who looked like she wanted to forget about the earlier incident. He calmly asked, "What bank?" "I think it's a private bank in Haicheng. It has financial dealings with banks in Hong Kong and Taiwan." Mo Jingshan's tone was heavy. "It's just a small to medium-sized financial company. If they want to send someone to Africa legally, they can just buy it." Jin Wan pursed her lips. Buy it? The Mo Corporation's business range is very wide. Many of the private banks and financial companies in Haicheng have dealings with the Mo Corporation. It's just a small bank. Do you still want to waste your time fighting with him? That was right. Fighting with that kind of scumbag was indeed a waste of time. Buying their bank's shares was not only the most direct method, but it was also killing two birds with one stone. After all, the financial industry was also becoming more and more profitable. Obtaining a relationship with a bank was also a kind of gain. Buying it would not be a loss. Jin Wan suddenly smiled. She held on to his arm and took the initiative to act spoiled. "Thank you, hubby. Hubby is the best. Hubby is the best." Chapter 112. Jin Wan reached out to tug on his sleeves. As she tugged, she blinked at him with incomparable sincerity. "I've really never had any feelings for Xing Yihan. You should know that before I married into the Mo family, I've never had any official boyfriends, nor do I have any so-called past. I'm practically the model of a clean body and mind." Hearing the word model, Mo Jingshan mildly glanced at her. It was clear that he had gained a rare bit of patience from her sincere explanation. Jin Wan took the opportunity to hug his arm. "Before you, I've never loved any man." A trace of a smile appeared on Mo Jingshan's face. He reached out to smooth her hair, asking meaningfully, "Is Mrs. Mo confessing to me? You love me?" Jin Wan's heart stirred for a moment. Between her and Mo Jingshan, there had been all sorts of sweetness and warmth, but the word love had never been mentioned. She had yet to reply when she saw the man's lips curve slightly deeper. It seemed like his mood had suddenly improved. His mood was indeed not bad. Jean Wan's heart was currently in complete turmoil. The question that she had never dared to think about had suddenly leaped out in front of her unintentionally. By the time Jean Wan returned to herself, Mo Jingshan's hand had already tangled in her hair. He was watching her with a slight smile. "Aren't you going to continue charging your phone?" Jean Wan finally recalled that her phone had only been charged for less than 2 minutes before being unplugged. She rushed to continue charging. When she turned back, she saw that Mo Jingshan had picked up the remote control by the bedside and raised the temperature of the air conditioning by 2 degrees. The man's back view was tall and steady. No matter what time it was, he would always be unhurried and calm. Jean Wan suddenly chuckled lightly. Mo Jingshan turned to glance at her. "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing much. It's just that I suddenly realized that the great CEO Mo is like a professional nanny in front of me. No matter if it's hot or cold, he can take care of me meticulously. I should actually be moved to tears. I shouldn't be laughing at all. I admit my mistake." As she spoke, she could not help but laugh out loud. Her eyes curved into crescents as she laughed. Mo Jingshan casually tossed the remote control onto the bed, calmly saying, "It won't be too late to laugh when you learn how to take care of yourself." Jean Wan slept again in the afternoon. After all, she had used up all her energy last night and this morning. He only woke up when the sky turned dark. When he woke up, he saw Mo Jingshan sitting on the sofa. In his hands were the company documents that Shinmu had sent over in the afternoon, as well as some files that he needed to look through personally. The sofa in this hotel room was very soft. Mo Jingshan's sitting posture was elegant and proper. This man's beauty seemed to be innate. Even if he was just sitting there quietly looking at the company documents, he would still attract everyone's attention. Jean Wan got off the bed. She had just walked over when Mo Jingshan raised his head to look at her. His clear and heavy expression met her sleepy appearance. "You're not going to sleep?" he asked. "It's getting dark. Sleep after 10 o'clock. Otherwise, your schedule will be messed up." Jean Wan saw the logo of Shine Group printed on the document in his hand. Knowing that it was a cooperation project with Shine Group, she didn't want to disturb him. Jean Wan turned to pour him a glass of water. "Come here," Mo Jingshan called. Hearing this, Jean Wan approached the sofa. Mo Jingshan patted the seat beside him, indicating for her to sit down. Jean Wan glanced at the water dispenser and gave up on the idea of pouring him a glass of water. She obediently sat down. The man's arm circled around her waist, naturally and intimately holding her in his embrace. His gaze remained focused on the documents in his hands. "Since Shine's project hasn't ended, why didn't you return to the company today? You've wasted the entire day in the hotel with me." "I'm already feeling bad," Jean Wan took the opportunity to ask as he placed the documents in his hands down. Mo Jingshan mildly curved his lips. He raised his hand to press against his brows. After resting for a few seconds, he picked up the documents again and continued reading. At the same time, his hand around her waist moved up, running through her soft hair. His gaze was on the documents, but his voice was directed at her. "There are just some follow-up matters that require my signature. I've worked overtime for almost a week, so I'll spend more time with you these 2 days." As he spoke, he lowered his head to look at her. "Not just today. My time tomorrow belongs to you as well." From last night until today, the two of them had stayed in this hotel room. Their food and necessities had all been sent up by the hotel staff. Although it was rare for the two of them to have such a pure, undisturbed world, why did Jean Wan feel that Mo Jingshan was implying that tomorrow, the two of them might have to spend the entire day in bed, when the hotel's dinner arrived, Jean-Wan nibbled on the pork ribs while thinking about how she could enjoy such a warm and peaceful vacation time with Mo Jingshan while perfectly avoiding contact with the bed. Why isn't there a single vegetable dish in the hotel's meal tonight? Jean-Wan asked as she ate. We've stayed in the room for an entire day and even had a stomach full of meat that night. Why don't we find a place to pick some vegetables and fruits to cook for ourselves tomorrow? Is there any specialized organic vegetable garden in Haiqing? Mo Jingshan glanced at her as though he could instantly see through her thoughts. After 2 seconds, he said, "There is. I'll bring you there tomorrow." Jean-Wan placed another piece of pork ribs into her mouth, her heart filled with joy. She finally found a perfect excuse to avoid the bed. The next day, Jean-Wan had just pushed open Mo Jingshan's car door and stepped out when she saw a cluster of villas located in the wealthy area of Haiqing. Although it was a cluster of villas, it was a priceless area in Haiqing. There were not many people living here because not everyone could live here. How could there be a vegetable garden in a place like this? Did you bring me here to pick the grass? Jean-Wan suspected that she had been tricked by him and turned back to ask. Mo Jingshan parked the car and walked over. Go to Qin Siding's place. You can pick whatever you want. Ah. This is where Dr. Qin lives. Jean-Wan was astonished. He lives here alone. The backyard of the villa is spacious. In recent years, the Qin family's elder likes to grow his own vegetables and fruits. There isn't enough space at home, so he took over Qin Siding's backyard. Jean-Wan's gaze shifted toward the villa. So, behind such a beautiful, high-class villa in Dr. Qin's home, there's actually a vegetable garden. This strange scene, as they spoke, a low-profile gray sports car drove in from the empty road. Originally, it was about to drive past them when it suddenly braked. The car window rolled down, revealing Qin Siding's slightly surprised handsome face. What's the situation? Why have you come to my place? Jean-Wan felt as though she was about to steal vegetables but was discovered by the owner. She raised her hand and awkwardly waved at him. Hi, Dr. Qin. Qin Siding's gaze shifted down, noticing the basket in Jean-Wan's hands. He did not know where she had gotten it from. Chapter 113. The security of this villa area was very strict. Thankfully, Qin Siding returned in time, saving Jean-Wan a lot of unnecessary trouble. She followed him in. After receiving permission, Jean-Wan carried the basket all the way to the back of the villa. Qin Siding glanced at the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. He watched the woman in the backyard with a lukewarm smile on his lips as he leaned against the wine cabinet by the side. He took out a bottle of aged red wine and poured it into a goblet. He handed a glass to Mo Jingshan, swirling the wine in the glass as he casually said, "You really have endless ways of coaxing a woman. You even selflessly contribute to me." Mo Jingshan's lips curved imperceptibly. He took a sip of the wine and placed the glass down. "When did your taste become so bad?" he mildly mocked. Qin Siding coldly snorted. "I have at least 5 to 6 operations in the hospital every day. I'm so busy that I don't even have time to go home. The wine cabinet is filled with gifts from others. There are both good and bad ones. It's already not bad to have a few drinkable bottles. You're still picky." Mo Jingshan coldly said, "I'll ask Shenmu to send 2 bottles over another day." Qin Siding raised his brows, placing down the wine glass. He could not hold back his laughter as he said, "It turns out this transaction is still worth it. Your wine is all 80 years old, high-quality wine. A basket of vegetables and fruits can be exchanged for 2 bottles of good wine. In the future, can I quit my job and focus on nurturing this vegetable field? It's even more profitable than being a doctor." Although Mo Jingshan was slightly disgusted, he still picked up the glass of wine and took a sip. A moment later, he indifferently said, "Ever since that woman kicked you away and went overseas, your quality of life and taste have been plummeting. I really can't stand it anymore." Ah. Qin Siding poured another glass of wine, but his smile did not reach his eyes. He turned to glance at Jin Wan, who was picking vegetables excitedly behind him. He narrowed his eyes to say, "Brothers are like limbs, women are like clothes. This old man has gotten used to being naked these years." Mo Jingshan's cold brows moved. He mockingly glanced at him. "Who was the one who almost broke his own limbs for a woman? You speak as though you've seen through the mortal world. Do you really think you're a vegetarian monk?" Qin Siding frowned without batting an eyelid. He did not speak at first, but a moment later, he poured a glass of wine and drank it in one gulp. Putting down the wine glass heavily, Qin Siding sneered coldly. "So what if you have a woman?" Impressive." Qin Siding choked and stared at him with a smile. He then raised his hand and pressed between his brows. "I'm going to the back to see your woman. Don't King disgust me here." Jin Wan was currently picking vegetables from the vegetable field in the backyard. She did not expect Dr. Qin's backyard to be so large. There were all kinds of vegetables and fruits. Although it was autumn, more than half of the backyard was covered with a greenhouse that could gather sunlight and heat. It could be seen that the Qin family's elder was indeed fond of these things. He even arranged such professional autumn and winter planting facilities so appropriately. Although the style of this vegetable garden and orchard was really out of place in this high-class villa area, standing in this lush green field was really relaxing and refreshing. Most importantly, Dr. Qin's home was very clean. The fruits and vegetables in the backyard were also grown especially well. There was no need to worry about pesticides or other chemicals like the orchards outside. Jin Wan plucked a bright red tomato and casually plucked the cabbage by the side. It was fresh and juicy. Even though it had not been washed or cooked, it was already stimulating one's appetite. Abruptly, she heard footsteps from nearby. She turned to see Qin Siding leisurely approaching. He glanced at the things in her basket, and a trace of a smile flashed past his eyes. "Mrs. Mo is so carefree. I almost thought you came here for a vacation." Qin Siding walked over, casually picking up a cabbage from the basket. "And, speaking of which, it seems like our Qin family can also expand into the agricultural vegetable industry in the future. For these kinds of vegetables, 100 yuan per piece is not too much. Thankfully, you're not interested in the Qin family's company. Otherwise, with your scamming behavior, the Qin family would be ruined in a few years." Jin Wan half-jokingly plucked another tomato. She casually wiped it in her hands and took a bite. Qin Siding glanced at her. "You're eating it without washing it. There are no pesticides on it. It's not like there's anything wrong with eating it." Jin Wan's mood was especially good due to the sweet and sour taste in her mouth. She completely ignored Qin Siding's disgusted expression and used her other hand to pluck another tomato for him. Seeing that he did not take it, she raised her eyebrows and tossed it into the basket. "I know you doctors are all misophobic, but don't be so spoiled, all right? You don't even want to eat something so natural. Don't tell me you only drink disinfectant every day." Qin Siding stood casually with his arms crossed. He casually and indifferently glanced at her. The spoiled Ji family's young miss actually dares to say someone else is spoiled. Ah, are you slapping your own past face? Have you forgotten what kind of temper you had in the past? "People change," Yi Zichin said. Jin Wan did not look at him. She lowered her head to inspect the vegetables in the basket. Her tone was warm and calm. "Regardless of whether it was in the past or now, I'm still me. It's normal for my personality and habits to change a little. Enchanting suddenly laughed mockingly, coldly and indifferently saying, "Indeed, women are all fickle." Jinwan's hand that was fiddling with the vegetables in the basket suddenly paused. She vaguely heard some deeper meaning in his tone and instinctively felt that Enchanting had a story. She raised her head and glanced at him. Enchanting did not look at her again. When he turned around, he coldly threw down a sentence. "Be careful. Don't step on the radishes and potatoes on the ground. If you damage them, my family's elder will directly look for your family's Jinxian to settle the score." Jinwan paused. She lowered her head to look at the things planted in the soil by her feet. Earlier on, she did not pay attention to this side. Thankfully, she did not step on them. The fruits are all at the back. If it's too high, take a ladder and pick them yourself. Last night, you could even jump out of the window. Climbing a tree shouldn't be difficult for you. While speaking, Enchanting glanced at her with a hint of a smile. When Jinwan directly rolled her eyes at him, he used his chin to point not far away. "The ladder is over there. It's very safe. You won't fall." "Thanks." Jinwan took another bite of the tomato in her hand and turned to head to the orchard behind. It was as though they had a great harvest. Jinwan happily held the basket full of vegetables as she walked back from the back. "Dr. Chen, is the kitchen in your house usable?" Jinwan asked excitedly. Enchanting narrowed his eyes. "So you're not only here to pick vegetables, but you're really treating my place as a holiday villa. You even want to start a fire and cook." "Not only do we want to start a fire, we're also planning to stay here tonight. Do you have any objections?" Enchanting leaned against the door. "It's been 2 months, and I finally have a rare day off. Just for this one day, I have to watch the two of you show off your affection in front of me. It hurts my eyes. Dash." Chapter 114. You don't want to see. Jinxian casually tossed a high-class residential area access card onto the coffee table in front of Enchanting. "Aolan International belongs to you tonight. Limited to guest rooms. The password is Jinwan's birthday." Enchanting lightly snorted. "How would I know when your woman's birthday is?" Jinwan had already entered the kitchen with the basket in her hands. However, she could still hear Enchanting's voice from outside. "Furthermore, I'm not stupid. Why would I run to your place to eat takeout when the food is delivered to my mouth?" As he spoke, Enchanting casually tossed his coat aside and elegantly sat down on the sofa. It was as though he was prepared to wait for Jinwan to prepare a sumptuous meal for them. Jinwan walked out and saw Enchanting's expression as though he was waiting to enjoy himself today. She could not help but laugh. She found an apron and wrapped it around her neck before returning to the kitchen. "Speaking of which, does Jinwan know how to cook?" Enchanting finally remembered the most serious problem. His brows rose. Jinxian did not reply. His suit had long been placed aside. He casually unbuttoned his sleeves and rolled up his sleeves. He indifferently and coldly said, "To be able to taste my woman's cooking, you should say that you're blessed for 3 lifetimes." Enchanting snorted, clearly not believing him. "Are you serious? Will I get food poisoning today?" Jinxian, you can choose to starve or not eat." By the time he finished speaking, Jinxian had already entered the kitchen. Seeing that Jinwan was washing vegetables, he approached. "What else do you need to wash?" "I'll help you." Jinwan did not raise her head, continuing to wash the vegetables seriously. "There's no need. I can do it myself. Dr. Chen's house usually has helpers coming over to clean or cook." There's nothing lacking in this kitchen. It's easy to find. I can handle it myself. As she spoke, she turned to pick up the peeler to peel the potatoes. Her back was facing Immerse. The man approached from behind, helping her tie the 2 straps on the back of her apron. Did the straps come loose? Earlier on, my hands were wet, so I casually tied it. I didn't pay much attention. Jinwan turned back to glance behind her before raising her eyes to smile at Immerse. The little woman smiled gently, turning back to continue washing the vegetables. Her serious appearance caused Immerse to be unable to shift his gaze away. The kitchen seemed to be in harmony. Even now, Qin Sighting deeply suspected that Jinwan, who had always been a pampered young lady, would actually cook. From the sound of it, there was no messiness in the kitchen or the sound of pots and pans falling to the ground. It was steady, orderly, harmonious, and calm. The sound of vegetables being washed and cut was more like the most soothing rhythm in the world. Jinwan really knew how to cook. This realization caused Qin Sighting to start doubting his life. I ate meat last night, and now it's all vegetarian again. Jinwan suddenly poked her head out from the kitchen door, looking at Qin Sighting, who was sitting on the sofa and doubting his life. Dr. Qin, you should be familiar with this area, right? Can you go to the supermarket and help me buy some fish and some meat suitable for stir-frying? Qin Sighting raised his brows and glanced at her in surprise. You want me to buy it? Don't tell me you want me to go. Jinwan raised her still wet hands. I'm still washing and cutting the vegetables. Going back and forth is too much of a waste of time. Where's your man? Qin Sighting casually placed a hand on the back of the sofa. Jing Shen is helping me, aw. He's not very familiar with this area. As Jinwan spoke, she chuckled at him. Dr. Qin, if you want to eat early, I'll have to trouble you to run an errand. Otherwise, all of us will have to starve. Troublesome. Qin Sighting complained impatiently, but he still got up. He picked up his coat and placed it on his arm. Then, he picked up the electronic car key and strode out the door. Jinwan turned back to the cupboard, only to see that in just a short while, Immerse had already helped her separate the vegetables she had washed and put them away. Then, she saw the man in a shirt and trousers mixing the seasonings of each dish in proportion to each bowl. The man was tall and straight to begin with. Now that he was standing here doing all this, the difference from a high-ranking elite to a housekeeper actually gave rise to a kind of warmth that could warm people to death. Most of the things she needed to do had already been done by him. Thus, Immerse was not helping her at all. Instead, it was clearly she who was helping him. TSK, in that case, what Immerse had said to Qin Sighting earlier should be, to be able to taste Immerse's cooking, it was definitely Qin Sighting's fortune of 3 lifetimes. Qin Sighting followed Jinwan's request and bought raw fish, meat, and other fresh ingredients. He threw the shopping bag into the kitchen and did not pay them any more attention. He returned to the bathroom to wash his hands twice. Jinwan saw it and leaned against Immerse's side to mutter, I heard that doctors have the habit of washing their hands dozens of times a day. It seems like this is true. Immerse smiled and did not say anything. The man's arms that were exposed from his sleeves were firm and strong. He placed the pot on the stove, his movements smooth and handsome. Jinwan cut the newly bought meat while softly asking, is it really because Dr. Qin has loved to learn medicine since he was young that he gave up the inheritance rights to the Qin family's company and insisted on becoming a doctor? Immerse's tone was mild. No. Ha. No. Then could it be that he was forced? Jinwan was shocked. Immerse did not reply. He lowered his gaze to see that when Jinwan cut the meat, the sharp knife would always brush past her fingers. Although her fingers were not cut, his brows still furrowed imperceptibly. He calmly said, "Go to the back and pick some vegetables suitable for making a salad. You can just make a simple fruit and vegetable salad." "All right." Hearing this, Jean Wand placed the knife in her hand down. She washed her hands and turned to pick up her small vegetable basket to head out. In the backyard, Jean Wand picked out various fresh vegetables. The kitchen was also quiet. Jean Sighting leisurely lay on the sofa, preparing to sleep for a while before waking up to eat. In the end, the moment he closed his eyes, the sound of footsteps approached. His calf was abruptly kicked. Jean Sighting opened his eyes to see Mo Jingshan holding a shining, silver kitchen knife in his hand. His gaze was cold and sharp. "Come over and help me. Isn't there, Jean Wan? How am I supposed to help you?" Jean Sighting did not move. "If you want to eat, then go in and cut the meat for me." Mo Jingshan coldly tossed down these words before turning to head back. Jean Sighting rubbed his brows. He stood up and walked to the kitchen door with his arms crossed. He lazily said, "My hand that holds the scalpel still needs to help you cut the meat. Why don't you let Jean Wan finish cutting before going out?" Mo Jingshan did not turn his head back. "She's not suited to use a knife." Jean Sighting rolled his eyes. If he was afraid that his woman would cut her fingers, he could just say it directly. He sounded so dignified as though no one could tell. "I've discovered that ever since you had a woman, you've really broken through my understanding of you. The words wife-doting maniac really suits you. Mo Jingshan, you flatter me." Chapter 115. Finally, with the cooperation of the three of them, a feast was prepared. Although most of the dishes were vegetarian, since the great CEO Mo was the chef, they would definitely not be simple dishes. What's more, Dr. Chin was personally in charge of the various fish and meat slices. This table was filled with color, aroma, and taste. It was so perfect that Jean Wan wanted to take a photo and post it on her social media. It was a pity that there were no social media apps like WeChat or Weibo. However, Jean Wan still secretly took 2 photos, planning to save them in her phone. Mo Jingshan saw her small actions and did not expose her, allowing her to take photos. Jean Wan took the opportunity to add Mo Jingshan into the frame as well. With 2 clicks, the handsome head chef Mo and the smiling head surgeon Chin at the back formed a perfect group photo with the feast on the table. "Can we eat now?" Jean Sighting pulled out a chair and sat down. "Dr. Chin, do you want to test the poison first?" Jean Wan sat down and asked with a teasing smile. "That's good too. Although Mrs. Mo's food doesn't taste very good, at least it won't poison me. However, the one cooking today is CEO Mo, then, that might not be the case." Jean Sighting picked up his chopsticks and picked up the nearest dish, tasting it. As he chewed, he was silent for a long time. "How is it? Is it delicious?" Jean Wan was like a grandma selling melons, showing off her husband's skills. With the great CEO Mo personally cooking, this kind of rare delicacy is definitely something that can only be encountered by luck. Jean Sighting sneered, not answering if it was delicious or not. "Didn't you say you were the one cooking? How did it become your man's chef?" Jean Wan pointed at the salad and fruit salad on the table. "These 2 dishes count as well." "What kind of dish is this?" Jean Sighting snorted as he picked up another vegetable leaf with salad dressing. After tasting it, his brows moved, but he remained silent for a long time. Jean Wan smiled. "My salad is seasoned with a secret recipe. It tastes different from the other salads you've eaten, doesn't it?" Jean Sighting furrowed his brows and finally gave up resisting. "It's indeed not bad. Marriage is truly a magical thing. It can make the great Immerse willing to cook for a woman, and it can even make the pampered and unparalleled Miss G suddenly become a good wife and loving mother. So, Dr. Chin, don't always have a bitter and hateful attitude towards women. You should fall in love and get married. You'd better worry about yourself. Chin Siding sneered and glanced meaningfully at Jin Wan. You haven't even figured out your own man's background, and you still want to pretend to be an emotional expert in front of me. The more mysterious a man is, the more charming he is. Anyway, he's my husband. No matter how unfathomable he is, he's still my husband. Jin Wan rolled her eyes at him. Chin Siding snorted coldly. You're quite confident. Why weren't you confident when you jumped out the window last night? I was drunk last night, so I wasn't sober. Can you argue with a drunk person? Sophistry. Seeing that the two of them were about to start fighting, Immerse helplessly rubbed his brows. All right, even food can't stop your mouths. As he spoke, he placed a few dishes into Jin Wan's bowl. Jin Wan had long been hungry. She ignored Chin Siding's lukewarm and slightly mocking expression and picked up her bowl and chopsticks to eat. In the end, Chin Siding's appetite also increased, and he ate a lot. Jin Wan's heart was proud. She knew that even if Immerse was no longer a CEO, any restaurant he opened would be filled with guests because of the delicious food. Even a rich young master like Chin Siding, who had grown up with a golden spoon in his mouth, could be satisfied no matter how crafty his taste was. But he refused to admit it. TSK. While Jin Wan and Chin Siding were fighting with their eyes, Immerse smiled mildly and did not speak. In the meantime, the phone on the table vibrated. He casually picked it up and saw that Immerse had sent a message. His gaze calmly read the few lines on the screen, and a trace of coldness that was difficult to detect appeared in his eyes. At this moment, Chin Siding suddenly said, "The taste of the salad dressing you made is indeed very unique. Do you mind helping me make another plate of fruit salad?" Jin Wan raised her brows, curling her lips at his sudden admitting defeat. She very generously stood up and headed to the kitchen. In the dining room that was separated from the kitchen by a wall, Chin Siding's gaze shifted toward Immerse, asking softly, "What is it?" Immerse's gaze was cold as he tossed his phone onto the table. Before the phone screen automatically darkened, Chin Siding glanced at it. Then, the moment the phone darkened, he calmly asked, "Is this a warning or a declaration of war?" Immerse did not speak, his gaze cold. Chin Siding understood and smiled playfully. "What do you plan to do? After all, this isn't the first time." Immerse raised his eyelids. After several seconds, he calmly spat out, "There won't be a second time." Chin Siding raised his brows. "Why don't you arrange someone skilled by Jin Wan's side? Nanheng has several well-trained bodyguards under him." That night, Jin Wan and Immerse stayed here. Before returning to the guest room to rest, she handed the pill she had specially brought over to Chin Siding. The last time she returned to the Ji home, she had used the excuse of her stomach feeling unwell to sneak into Ji Hongwen's room to retrieve these pills. To prevent others from noticing, she had only poured 1 or 2 pills into each bottle. However, these were sufficient for Chin Siding after a detailed examination. Chin Siding tossed the pills into a small, transparent glass bottle. He turned back to see that Immerse was already preparing to bring Jin Wan upstairs to rest. "I say, the two of you better not treat this place as a holiday villa. Pay attention to your manners. This old man is still staying downstairs." Chin Siding's brows revealed the strong unhappiness of a single dog at night. His tone was filled with warning. "The two of you are not allowed to make any noises in my house at night. Jin-won, Mo Jingshin glanced at him lightly and took Jin-won upstairs with his arm around her. The entire day, Jin-won's mood was very relaxed. She also slept very well. As she slept early, she woke up early. The sky had just begun to brighten when she woke up. The morning sun was deep blue, and the sky had yet to brighten. She was about to get off the bed to pour herself a glass of water when she paused. She saw Mo Jingshin standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was dressed in a white shirt and black trousers. He had one hand in his pocket, slender and silent. He was still dressed in the same clothes as yesterday. Jin-won turned to look at the time on her phone. It was not even 6:00. Could it be that he did not sleep the entire night? Jin-won was slightly surprised. She stood up and walked over. The moment she approached, Mo Jingshin turned around. Their eyes met. The man's deep, black eyes watched her face, sweeping across her brows. His voice was gentle and hoarse. "Why did you wake up so early?" Jin-won did not answer, asking in return, "You didn't sleep last night?" Chapter 116. How can I not sleep? Jin-won dragged him to the bedside, forcing him to sit on the edge of the bed. "Now, sleep." Mo Jingshin smiled, holding her hand and placing her on his lap. He kissed the corner of her lips. "You've woken up and are full of energy. Aren't you afraid that I'll exhaust your energy again?" Jin-won turned and bit down on his lips. She lowered her voice to say, "Dr. Chin said that we're not allowed to make any noises. He drank last night and is still sleeping." Mo Jingshin kissed her lips once, and then again. Jin-won had just woken up early in the morning. Afraid that she would be seduced by him to the point of doing something indescribable in Chin Siding's home, she rushed to press her hand against his chest. Her expression was serious. "By the way, I have to make a trip to the studio tomorrow." Mo Jingshin smiled mildly. "If you have any problems, remember to tell me. Don't bear it alone. Always remember that you have a husband. They're all small problems left behind by Han Tianyuan. I can handle those unpresentable dregs," Jin-won softly said. Mo Jingshin kissed her on the cheek again. It was a very warm kiss. After a moment, the man spoke softly and huskily, "Recently, Haiching hasn't been peaceful. The U Garden security is better. Move back to the U Garden." Jin-won's gaze swept past his calm, handsome face. She did not ask further. "All right, then let's go back." When Jin-won went downstairs, she saw that Chin Siding, who was supposed to head to the hospital early in the morning, was standing by the large window on the first floor. He held a glass of wine in his hand and was currently looking at another villa about 100 meters away. He had drunk last night. Early in the morning, he actually still had wine in his hand. From this angle, she could only see that Chin Siding's back was indescribably dark and cold. He did not seem like the person who usually teased her or liked to tease her. Just his back view alone made him seem like a completely different person. Jin-won turned and returned upstairs. When she saw Mo Jingshin approaching, she raised her hand to her lips and made a shoot expression. "Did Dr. Chin drink too much last night?" "It's already so late, but he hasn't gone to the hospital," Jin-won whispered. Hearing this, Mo Jingshin walked down the stairs. Seeing the scene in front of the window, his gaze indifferently swept toward the villa in front of him that no one had lived in for 4 whole years. There was a limousine parked outside the villa. The engraved iron gate in front of the villa was open, and a few people were moving luggage inside. From the color of the luggage, most of it was for women. With just a glance, Mo Jingshin continued downstairs. His tone was cold and carried a hint of mockery. "She's back. Aren't you going to greet her?" Enchanting put down the wine glass in his hand and turned around. There was no trace of alcohol in his eyes, and his lips curved into a cold smile. I have 2 surgeries this afternoon. I have nothing to do in the morning, so I need to sleep for a few hours to conserve my energy. Remember to close the door when you leave. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and walked inside. Jinwan waited for Enchanting to return to the bedroom before heading downstairs. She saw Enchanting standing there with one hand in his pocket. His expression was indifferent, and he did not seem to be unhappy with Enchanting's attitude. He also did not feel that it was inappropriate for him to be treated coldly. Jinwan could clearly see that Enchanting's expression earlier was not normal. Enchanting's expression was also unfathomable. On the way back to the Yew Garden, Jinwan leaned against the seat and flipped through the messages on her phone. In the end, she stopped at the last 2 messages that Xia Tian had sent her yesterday. It can't be. Why did you suddenly want to transfer hospitals? It wasn't easy for me to gain some interest in Dr. Sheng. Jinwan, have you been hiding some evil intentions recently? Are you purposely trying to break my marriage? Oh. I'm so angry. Jinwan curved her lips. Since yesterday, she had not replied. Xia Tian was most likely about to explode from anger. She opened the message page and tapped on the screen. That's right. I came with the evil intentions of cutting off your rotten peach blossoms. Have you already transferred hospitals? In less than half a minute, Xia Tian directly replied, F***CK. You're only replying now. I thought that your sex life with Enchanting had not ended since yesterday. Jinwan rolled her eyes and sent a disdainful emoticon over. Xia Tian, yesterday, I don't know where these cold and reserved lunatics in suits came from. The moment they arrived at the hospital, they immediately completed the procedures for me to transfer hospitals. They didn't even give me the slightest chance to resist. Right now, I'm lying on a hospital bed in the new hospital, missing my Dr. Sheng so much. Jinwan, he isn't suitable for you. Don't think about it. You've committed all kinds of rotten peach blossoms this year. Killing one is one. Don't be delusional enough to fall into the swamp of love so quickly. Xia Tian, weren't you the one who pushed Dr. Sheng to me? You even allowed him to chat with me in the hospital room. He caused me to fall in love. In the end, you're saying that he's also rotten? Jinwan, she held her forehead. I was afraid that you would be harassed by that scum again. Considering that he's your main doctor, I allowed him to watch over you. Who knew that you would be so easily infatuated? Xia Tian, this is called being physically and mentally weak. My bones are all broken. Tell me, how weak am I? How weak am I? I lie here every day, bored to the point of becoming moldy. Why can't I appreciate the various men passing by me? Sorry, the attack of men. Forgive me for not being able to resist. Jinwan, your leg is broken, but your head is still intact, right? It just so happens that my studio has some market analysis stuff that needs someone to handle. I'll send the computer over to you. While you're recuperating, help me share some of the workload. It just so happens that you're good at these things. Xia Tian, I'm heartbroken, and you actually want me to work while I'm injured. Jinwan, it's precisely because you're heartbroken that you're using work to squeeze those useless thoughts out of your head. Besides, you've never been in love before. Why would you be heartbroken? Xia Tian, you're inhumane. Jinwan, from today onwards, I'm your boss. You're to obediently analyze the information of Hai Cheng's real estate market. Your additional salary will be arranging for various good-looking male doctors to take care of you 24 hours a day. If you're not obedient, I'll have Enchanting arrange for the ugliest doctor to harass you every day. Xia Tian, Jin Wan, I'm breaking off all ties with you. I'm going to beat you to death. Jin Wan, then you'll have to have the ability to jump now. After sending this message, she did not need to guess to know that Xia Tian was so angry that she smashed her phone. Jin Wan smiled and called the studio. She asked Xiao Ba to send a laptop to Xia Tian's ward. After arranging everything, the car had already arrived at the U Garden. Mo Jingshan was driving. Jin Wan suddenly leaned over and said fawningly, I suddenly feel that your decisive decision to transfer Xia Tian to another hospital is really brilliant. The man glanced at her expression, pressed her brows, and pushed her away. Sit back. You're disturbing my driving. Chapter 117. After entering the U Garden Villa, Xia Tian did not bother sending her any messages and directly called her. Jin Wan answered the call while changing her shoes. She did not pay attention and pressed the hands-free button. In an instant, she heard Xia Tian's roar through the phone. I don't care. Since you broke off my marriage, you have to find me a man as handsome, tall, and skilled as Dr. Sheng within half a year. Otherwise, my wounded little heart will never be able to calm down. Jin Wan, I want a man. I want a handsome one. Jin Wan. You have to compensate me with one. Jin Wan, Auntie Chen had just arrived at the door and heard the commotion. She almost could not hold back her laughter. Jin Wan pursed her lips and rushed to press the hands-free button back. She picked up the phone and pressed it against her ear, lowering her voice. Softer. How far do you want your loud voice to travel? Xia Tian. Damn, you didn't put it on hands-free earlier, did you? That's right. Jin Wan turned to see Mo Jingshan, who had just entered the door, staring at her with a deep gaze. Jin Wan pointed at the phone that had been hung up, explaining, Xia Tian has been in the hospital for so long and is about to collapse from boredom. Right now, she's really love-struck like a love-struck fool, he. Mo Jingshan was expressionless. If I hear another word about the surname Xing from her mouth, the Xia family will immediately come from S City to bring her away. From today onwards, she can forget about taking a single step into Haiqing. My conversations with her are always so vulgar. Don't take it to heart. Jin Wan knew that if he said it, he would definitely do it. Mo Jingshan indifferently curved his lips. He stared at her, speaking in a low and hoarse voice, stay away from those men who want to approach you, N. His tone was calm and emotionless, but there was a hint of warning in it. The next day, Jin Wan was in the U Garden study when 2 videos suddenly appeared in her mailbox. She clicked on them and glanced at them before directly closing them. She then curved her lips into a faint smile, but her eyes were colder. In the evening, she received Mo Jingshan's call. She supported her chin with her hand as she glanced at the computer screen. At the same time, she lazily and hoarsely said, Why are you calling at this time? Don't tell me you're working overtime again. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly, his clear and low voice ringing, You're that afraid of being alone in an empty room? I just don't want you to work too late and drive back. After all, the U Garden is a little farther than AO Lawn International. Even if Mrs. Mo lives in the suburbs of Haiqing, I still have to go home. A smile immediately appeared on Jin Wan's lips. Her voice was clear and pleasant. She asked gently, Has the Shine Group's cooperation project ended? Actually, she wanted to ask if An Shuyen and Mo Shaozi had already returned to the United States, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she changed the way she asked. Mo Jingshan did not reply. After a moment of silence, he said, Tonight, I'll bring you to meet someone. Be good and wait for me at home. Jin Wan glanced at the time. What time tonight? Before 6 o'clock. Okay, but I have to go to the studio later. There's a little situation there. I'll probably be back in the evening. Has your studio's financial crisis been resolved? Ji-won paused for a moment. It's all right. It's just a small problem. I can resolve it. Mo Jingshan was quiet for a few seconds. Go early and come back early. Don't wander around for the next 2 days. Got it. Ji-won could more or less guess the meaning behind his words. There must be a reason why he wanted her to return to the Yew Garden. Since he did not say, she did not ask. Before noon, Ji-won left the house and went straight to the studio. The moment she arrived at the studio, Xiao Ba saw her and immediately ran over as though she had seen her savior. Boss Nwan. You're finally here. If you came any later, I would have been worried to death. What happened? Earlier on, you were so flustered on the phone. Which investor came to create trouble? Ji-won asked unhurriedly as she walked toward the office. The two arrived at the door. Before Xiao Ba could speak, she suddenly heard a woman's voice coming from the office. Every word seemed to be filled with mockery and disdain. Ji-won stood outside the door and listened for a moment. She then pushed the door open and entered. Call your current person in charge over immediately. The 30 million we invested back then has been reduced to zero in the blink of an eye. It hasn't even been half a year since we invested. We haven't even seen a single dividend, and your company has already changed owners. Right now, you can't even take out the money. You even said that you've merged into some studio. From what I see, this is just an empty city hanging on the name of a studio. Ji-won saw the woman who was standing in front of the office table and pointing at the finance department supervisor. That woman was around 30 years old. She was tall and beautiful, dressed fashionably, and maintained herself well. With one look, she could tell that she was either a manager of some company or a rich wife with a high net worth. Boss, she's CEO Jean. In the past, when CEO Han was still around, CEO Jin's company invested 30 million yuan here on account of their relationship with the Han Corporation. The contract was for 3 years. Every 6 months, they would receive at least 20% interest. However, it has already been more than half a year. Right now, not only has the interest not been transferred to their company's account, even the money they invested is gone. Xiao Ba stood by Ji-won's side, softly explaining the situation. CEO Jean. She's the person in charge of the company called Tianxing Investment? Ji-won calmly asked. Xiao Ba nodded. That's right. CEO Jean, who was standing by the office table, noticed something behind her. She turned back to look at the person by the door. Xiao Ba was an intern assistant. CEO Jin's disdainful expression shifted away from her face and landed on Ji-won. When she saw Ji-won, her eyes narrowed. Ji-won wore a white cashmere sweater. It was soft and comfortable, casually fitting to her body. The light brown coat she was wearing was also extremely low-key. She stood there calmly, glancing in CEO Jin's direction. Unlike the others who were submissive, there was a polite yet distant smile in her eyes. Of course, that smile was not very obvious. It was as light as a blink of an eye. CEO Jin coldly snorted. She placed the expensive international brand bag in her hands to the side and turned to seriously size up Ji-won. Could you be the new boss that these people are talking about? Miss Ji, oh. Hello, I'm Ji-won. Ji-won only replied with this one sentence. Her gaze was cold, but not too distant. Unknowingly, she exuded a domineering aura that could control the situation. However, she restrained it well. Chapter 118. Who told you that our studio's finances are in the red? As Jean Wan spoke, her gaze shifted toward the supervisor of the finance department who was standing in her office. Supervisor Sue of the finance department was a woman close to 30 years old. She wore a pair of glasses, and her appearance was fair and refined. She had the demeanor of a white-collar elite. However, when Jean Wan's gaze landed on her, her eyes flashed, and she turned her head away in fear to avoid her gaze. CEO Jean pointed at Supervisor Sue. Supervisor Sue has already taken out all of the financial statements and the bank statements for the past 2 months. Although Miss G doesn't lack this 30 million, running a company isn't like playing house. You must return the money you owe. If you really can't return it, you can always reach out and ask your father for it. I don't care where you got the money from, but you must return it to me in its entirety. CEO Jean pointed at Supervisor Sue. Jean Wan's tone was mild, and her lips carried a smile that did not reach her eyes. Since your company signed a 3-year investment contract with us, and you're taking it back after just half a year, are you planning on unilaterally terminating the contract? CEO Jean revealed an expression as though she knew she would say this. She glanced at the man behind her who was carrying a briefcase and coldly smiled. I knew you would say that. You want to use the contract to discuss the breach of contract with me, right? I'll leave my words here. Today, not only will I successfully terminate the contract, the money must also be transferred immediately. Otherwise, don't blame my lawyer for taking you guys to court. Let's see if this studio of yours can continue operating. From start to finish, Jean Wan appeared unaffected by CEO Jean. She walked over and picked up the 2 financial reports and bank statements. After taking a few glances, she abruptly turned to look at the supervisor of the finance department who had been quietly standing by the side. Supervisor Sue, Jean Wan called out to her. Supervisor Sue did not expect her name to be called. She was startled and turned toward Jean Wan. Miss G, these are all the conclusions you came up with today? Jean Wan asked. Supervisor Sue lowered her head, appearing cautious and respectful as she answered, That's right. These are the debts that were left behind when CEO Han was still around. We've already deducted a portion of it from our liquid funds and paid it off. However, there's still a large portion that we still owe. CEO Jean called earlier and said that she wanted to come over to take a look. Yesterday, I worked overtime until very late to retrieve these financial reports, worked overtime until very late. Jean Wan smiled faintly before shifting her eyes. Her tone was soft, and her emotions were hard to discern. CEO Jean, can you give me 20 minutes to chat with my supervisor? CEO Jean glanced at her with disdain, her face full of ridicule and ridicule. You can get 30 million just by chatting. There were a few people that CEO Jean had brought along standing in the office. A few of them could not help but burst into laughter. Their eyes were filled with mockery and ridicule, as though they were watching a mere 20-year-old girl putting on a monkey show in this business world where no blood was shed. She smiled as well. G was. Jean of, Jean of, Jean. Jean, Jean was G of Jean. Of G. G Jean of G. G of Nwanli, you're indeed young. I'm afraid you haven't weaned yourself yet. You're really indulging in fantasy. CEO Jean sneered. She walked to the leather sofa in the office and sat down. Raising her delicate eyebrows, she looked at the diamond watch on her wrist and coldly mocked, I'll give you 20 minutes. If you can't take out the 30 million I want after 20 minutes, we'll meet in court. Jean Wan's smile was calm. She held the documents in her hands and turned around. Supervisor Sue, come with me. When they arrived at the office next door, Jean-Wan placed the documents in her hands on the table. She turned back to look at Supervisor Sue, who had just entered, with an indifferent gaze. The moment she met Jean-Wan's gaze, Supervisor Sue's footsteps immediately stiffened. Her eyes were slightly guarded. "Miss G, what do you want to talk to me about?" "Talk about what? What do you think?" Jean-Wan stared at her with a smile. "Your forgery skills are too inferior." Supervisor Sue looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean by that? What did I fake?" Jean-Wan picked up the receipt on the table and threw it in front of her. "Did you think that after taking over the company for so many days, I was really just playing house?" Supervisor Sue glanced at her and softly explained, "Of course, I don't dare to think that way. But right now, the debt deficit is a fact. When the company was in CEO Han's hands, it had already suffered a ridiculous loss. You can't come and settle the debt with me just because an investor has come knocking on our door. I'm only in charge of finance. It's not like I can generate money. If the money is gone, then it's gone. I can't possibly." Jean-Wan's brows rose slightly. Her tone was clear and cold. A month ago, there was still around 30 million in the company's treasury. It was used to support the construction of new buildings in the south. This money, in just a month's time, disappeared into thin air. This 30 million was eaten by you. Supervisor Sue's eyes flickered. She stammered, "I'm not sure either. A month ago, Miss G, you hadn't taken over the company. That money might have been, right now, Han Tianyuan has been locked up, but he's still alive. It hasn't reached the stage where the dead can't testify." Jean-Wan's voice was cold and did not yield in the slightest. "You want to take advantage of the troubled times when the company is changing managers to embezzle the company's funds and take this money for yourself. You have to see who your new owner is. If you want to hide it from my eyes, I'm afraid you'll have to cultivate for a few more years." Supervisor Sue suddenly panicked. She raised her voice to explain, "Your words have no proof. Could it be that just because CEO Jean wants to sue the studio, you're going to sell me out? You want me to be your scapegoat? You mean that I've wronged you?" Jean-Wan's face was expressionless. "Since you're so confident, isn't it simple? You'll be sued eventually. Why don't I sue you as well and leave you until the police finish investigating? You want to call the police?" Supervisor Sue did not expect things to develop to this stage. Her palms were sweaty. Jean-Wan unhurriedly said, "Is there a need for me to call the police? CEO Jean is sitting next door. She has already brought a lawyer over. Perhaps she's prepared an even stronger backup plan. The police should be here soon." Supervisor Sue bit down harshly on her lips. Her eyes reddened as she glared at her. She angrily said, "Jean-Wan, this company is yours. The one who's going to be sued is you. It has nothing to do with me. If you dare to make me a scapegoat, don't blame me for revealing the entire company's business system and secrets." Jean-Wan sneered. "All right. I want to see if you still have the guts to say those words to me when the evidence is placed before you." Manager Sue's face paled. "Evidence? What evidence?" Chapter 119. Supervisor Sue had thought that Jean-Wan was just a spoiled rich young lady who had bought 2 companies with some spare cash. She would occasionally come to the company for a meeting, fire a few people, and display her might as a boss. Apart from that, she was just like Han Tianyuan, a piece of trash. However, Jean-Wan's following words caused Supervisor Sue to be unable to maintain her composure. "Do you think that just because I don't come to the company, I won't understand the company's situation? I have eyes. I'll investigate and see. You're the head of the finance department. I'm afraid you won't be able to memorize the monthly analysis of the company's financial situation. But I can. Supervisor Sue furrowed her brows in disbelief. Jean Wan coldly watched her. I know where every single cent is spent. And this 30 million yuan of liquid funds has already been transferred away a month ago. Do you think I haven't discovered this matter? Supervisor Sue's eyes reddened. She took a deep breath and tried hard to hide her emotions. Supervisor Sue, do you believe me? Ever since the first day I came here, I've already noticed you. I've been waiting for the time when you can't sit still anymore, Jean Wan calmly said. At the same time, she took out her phone and data cable from her bag, connecting it to the computer on the table. Not long after, an indescribable video appeared on the computer, as well as the sounds of men and women unable to control themselves. The moment she saw the video on the computer, Supervisor Sue turned to look at Jean Wan. Her face instantly paled to the point where it lost all color. How did you, when the person in charge of the company was handing over his position, you took advantage of a loophole in the company's finances to embezzle more than 30 million yuan of liquid funds? This is a crime of theft. Jean Wan crossed her arms, coldly leaning against the table. Her tone was slow and cold. And today, you used CEO Jean to create trouble, not only to use this matter to escape, but also to make enemies between CEO Jean and CEO Jean. After all, even if I can't keep my studio, I still have the G family and the MO family behind me. You wanted to use me to get rid of CEO Jean. Am I right? Supervisor Sue's eyes widened. She stared at Jean Wan as though she was looking at a monster. He couldn't believe it. How did she find out? Jean Wan saw the trace of panic in Supervisor Sue's eyes. It was extremely cold, and her exquisite facial features became cold and imposing. CEO Jin's husband slept with you before, and the two of you were so passionate that you could have sex in a small hotel that wasn't very safe. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to find such a video. Jean Wan glanced at the paused image on the computer screen. The naked man and woman were entangled together, and their faces were very clear in the video. She then glanced at Supervisor Sue, who appeared to have been petrified. Jean Wan coldly said, CEO Jin's husband is rich and powerful. He's also quite good-looking. You love him so much that you can't extricate yourself. You plan to embezzle the money and leave the studio. You want to be with CEO Jin's husband, so you want to borrow my hands to get rid of him. What if I kill her directly because of a complaint about my studio? You killed two birds with one stone. That's a great way to kill two birds with one stone. When Supervisor Sue spoke again, her voice was already trembling. She could no longer maintain her composure. You. Miss G, what exactly do you want? Do you admit to all of this? Jean Wan's gaze was sharp as she retorted. What exactly do I have to do to make you delete the video? Supervisor Sue did not dare to look at the frozen image on the screen. Her eyes were red, and her emotions were slightly out of control. I won't say any more useless words to you. Jean Wan nimbly turned off the computer to avoid being blinded by the video. She kept her phone and unhurriedly said, if you want to be someone else's mistress, I don't care. I don't care about your relationship problems, but you have to return the 30 million yuan you took from here immediately. Immediately. Supervisor Sue glared at her. Her complexion was pale as she suddenly said, the money has already been transferred to an overseas account. I have no way of retrieving it now. The moment her words landed, Jean Wan took out a recording pen from her bag at almost the same time. You can choose not to return it. CEO Jean is right. I, Jean Wan, really don't lack this 30 million yuan. Jean Wan was unconcerned as she said, "Every single word you said earlier has already been recorded. Furthermore, it will be automatically transferred from this recording pen to my computer's data backup. As long as the police appear here, I'll hand this over to them. Then, I won't have to worry about anything else. Not only will the money be returned, even your shameful act of interfering in someone else's marriage will be discovered by the police. When that happens, CEO Jean and her husband will most likely not let you off." Supervisor Sue's entire body trembled. She stared at the recording pen in her hand and thought for a moment before saying hoarsely with bloodshot eyes, "If I hand over the money, can you delete this recording and video?" Jean Wan placed her phone and recording pen back into her bag. Her gaze was calm and unperturbed. Low class, greedy, and foolish. Jean Wan's voice was cold. "With your intelligence, if you walk on the right path, sooner or later, you will rise to the top. For a man with a family, you destroyed your own future and even broke the law for 30 million yuan. No matter what, you're in charge of finances. You're used to seeing money flowing like water. Could it be that you still don't understand how many people yearn for such ostentatious fame and fortune, and how many people despair?" Supervisor Sue bit her lips harshly. She first cried out, then cried until she sat on the ground. Her eyes were filled with fear and wariness as she looked toward Jean Wan. "Where's the money?" Jean Wan asked directly. She did not wish to waste any more time with her. Supervisor Sue hesitated for a moment. Originally, she did not want to hand it over, but she was very mindful as she looked toward Jean Wan's bag. The cell phone and recording pen in that bag could completely destroy her. She slowly took out a financial card with the Philippines logo. "It's here." Jean Wan walked over, received it, and glanced at it. "Ah, you even know to transfer the money to an account in the Philippines. This kind of international money transfer method is indeed very difficult to investigate. Such a meticulous person, TSK, as expected, you're destroying your own future." When Supervisor Sue heard these words, she covered her face in tears. She then stared at Jean Wan's bag with pleading eyes, as though she wanted nothing more than to destroy the recording pen and video. "I won't interfere with your dirty relationship transactions. But regarding the embezzlement of public funds, I will definitely hand it over to the police." Jean Wan moved away from her, saying, "I still need to settle CEO Jin's side. I don't have time to waste with you here. Just wait for the police to come and interrogate you." Jean Wan opened the door and walked out. She had the studio security guard the door to prevent Supervisor Sue from escaping and causing unnecessary trouble. Chapter 120. When CEO Jean saw that Jean Wan had returned, her smile was filled with mockery. "Miss G's expression seems very relaxed. Could it be that you really managed to conjure up 30 million yuan in these 20 minutes? Jean Wan calmly handed the Philippine International Financial Card to Xiao Ba and softly said, "First, check the amount of money in this card. Ask Supervisor Sue for the password. She's next door." Xiao Ba nodded and quickly walked out with the card. "What's that?" CEO Jean seemed to have noticed something. She stood up and approached, but Xiao Ba had already left with the card without turning back. "CEO Jean, don't be anxious. If you plan on taking away the money you invested back then, of course, I won't forcefully hold it back." Jean Wan calmly glanced at her. CEO Jean glanced at her. "Miss G, don't blame me for being too ruthless. Back then, I only invested some money into Han Tianyuan's company because of the Han Corporation. Now that the boss has changed, and I don't have any relations with your G family, of course, I have to take back the money." "I know." Jean Wan spoke and turned to open the laptop on her desk. She then opened a PowerPoint presentation she had personally prepared. It's not that I can't satisfy CEO Jin's request to terminate the contract. If you insist on terminating our partnership today, no matter what, I won't forcefully stop you. Jin Won smiled lightly. But before you make your final decision, CEO Jin, why don't you take some time to take a look at this? CEO Jin walked over and glanced at the contents of the laptop disapprovingly. CEO Jin should know of the properties and land resources under construction under our studio's name. For example, this piece of land in the southern part of the city. It's only a street away from the bustling area in the southern part of the city. 2 years ago, the price of this piece of land had already reached a sky-high price. When this area was first built, the pre-sale price had already exceeded 20,000 yuan per square meter. Although this year, the domestic real estate industry has been declining by more than half, and the price here has been dropping by around 5,000 yuan, based on the current construction progress, this area will only be completed by next summer. The prices of the other properties nearby are all lower by half. Furthermore, because the prices have been dropping, the sales of the properties are very good. And so, CEO Jean crossed her arms. Boss Jean, you shouldn't have been a Haiqing local, right? Jean Wan turned to look at her. If you're from High City, you should be well aware of the ratio between the rich and the poor in High City. You should also know that the base number of migrant workers is increasing at an extremely high percentage every year. In High City, the upper class with a net worth of more than 1 billion yuan accounts for 37% of the country's population. All the rich areas in High City are overcrowded. This price of more than 20,000 yuan per square meter is within the acceptable range for most people, but they are currently in a wait-and-see state. Jean Wan turned to the next page of the PowerPoint. As an investor, I can understand that you are not optimistic about the current property industry. However, based on the surrounding environment of the residential area under my studio's name, as well as the analysis of the surrounding per capita income, it is very clear that once the unreasonable talk of a property bubble is gradually forgotten, not to mention this residential area's price of 20,000 yuan per square meter, even if it were to rise to 30,000 yuan per square meter, there would still be a large number of people fighting over it. If we add on the hunger sales model, it is destined that the land and property under my studio's name will have room for growth. It will not end up as you think, losing everything. CEO Jean disapprovingly snorted. I remember that when Han Tianyuan first registered these two companies, he invested a lot of money. Adding on the purchase of land and the construction of properties, he invested quite a bit more. In the end, because the property industry was becoming more and more depressed, he only sold the company to you for 30 million yuan. As she spoke, CEO Jean narrowed her eyes. The money I invested is already enough to buy your current studio. Yet, you're still speaking to me confidently about how the property prices will continue to soar in the future. Do you think that you're a prophet, that it will definitely rise just because you say so? Han Tianyuan sold the company to me for 30 million yuan because he doesn't know how to do business. Opening two companies and squandering money for fun, it won't be too much of a pity to sell them off. Jean Wan smiled mildly. Right now, if CEO Jean offers 5 times the price to buy my studio, I'm afraid I won't agree. Ha! Who doesn't know how to boast? In the future, this will be a losing business. If you want to continue losing money, that's your business. I don't wish to continue participating in this investment. I want to take my money back. Can you stop me? I won't stop you. My words will only go so far. Jean Wan maintained an indifferent expression the entire time. The office door opened, and Xiao Ba returned with a card. She handed it to Jean Wan and softly whispered a number into her ear. Jean Wan placed the card on the office table. The money is here. I can also personally cancel the contract with you. Previously, it was merely a member of my finance department who embezzled public funds. We'll settle this sort of internal matter ourselves. The money has already been taken back. Previously, the figures and receipts that the finance department showed you were all fake. CEO Jean still insists on terminating the contract, is that right? Yes. CEO Jean looked at Jean Wan with disdain. A studio that is destined to lose money is not worth me spending a single cent to play a childish game with you. All right. Jean Wan raised her brows. Then have your lawyer bring the contract termination agreement over. I'll take a look. If there's no problem, we'll directly terminate our partnership. Boss Jean gave the lawyer behind her a look, and the lawyer hurriedly took his briefcase and walked forward quickly. Half an hour later, Jean Wan signed the contract termination agreement. Director Jean held the agreement and the financial card that had already been verified. She smiled smugly and looked around the office. She said sarcastically, "Even if you successfully bring this money back to me, I'm afraid that your liquid funds will be zero right now, right? The buildings under the studio's name have yet to be completed. What are you going to use to continue building? With this lousy place of yours, there won't be any investors who will look favorably upon it. Forget about other things, you won't even be able to afford the advertising fees for future sales." After finishing her words, CEO Jean smiled mockingly and turned to leave. Xiao Ba stood behind Jean Wan, angrily glaring at CEO Jin's back. Just as CEO Jean was about to step out of the door, several people dressed neatly in suits suddenly entered the studio. They did not look simple at all. "May I ask, which one of you is CEO G?" The young man dressed in a black suit at the very front asked politely the moment he entered. Jean Wan glanced at them, hiding the trace of doubt in her eyes. She answered, "I am." CEO Jean was originally about to leave. When she saw this scene, she curiously turned back to watch this scene. "Hello, CEO G. We are the representatives of the MO Corporation CE International Investment Agency. We represent the MO Corporation to sign a contract with your studio." Hearing these words, everyone in the office was instantly stunned. Jean Wan blinked. "Sign a contract?" "That's right. The MO Corporation will invest $200 million in your studio." Xiao Ba and the people in the office were instantly shocked to the point their jaws dropped. $200 million. CEO Jean, who had yet to leave, was also stunned. Her eyes were filled with shock. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."